Hey guys, tonight we're going somewhere most stories won't take you. Down. Not just down into the dirt, or the crypts, or the dungeons, but down under the lives of medieval people, into the slow dripping, never ventilated world beneath their homes. It's easy to picture the medieval world as all towers, torches, and tapestries, but you've probably never thought about what lies directly under the floorboards of a medieval townhouse. That's where we're starting. And that's where it starts to smell. You see, what most people forget or maybe deliberately block out is that the average medieval home didn't exactly have indoor plumbing. You had a chamber pot, maybe, if you were lucky, or a bucket, or a corner, and whatever happened to land in that container wasn't going to stay there long. It had to go somewhere. Often, that somewhere was just a hole in the ground beneath your house. Sometimes it was a cesspit, a makeshift storage of horrors that sat quite literally under your bed. And the thing is, medieval folks didn't build those homes with airtight floors. You might be sitting at dinner, gnawing on a questionable chicken leg, when a particularly damp breeze wafted up from beneath the boards to remind you that digestion is a full circle experience. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your local time and location in the comments. I want to know where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across a street paved in stone, but don't let the word paved fool you. These stones are slick with something more than rain. It's sticky underfoot. A smell rises like a memory you didn't want back, and you realize this is the cleaner part of town. Where are you heading to your home? Of course, and your home, like everyone else's, has no toilet, no sink, no pipes, just a pot in the corner, and hope that it doesn't overflow before morning. You live in a town where waste management means emptying your chamber pot out the window, ideally while yelling Gardeloo to warn those below. Sometimes you forget, sometimes you don't yell loudly enough, and sometimes someone doesn't move fast enough. That's just life in your neighborhood. Beneath your feet, under your bed, is the underworld you try not to think about your cesspit. A shallow pit dug into the earth, partially lined with stone or wood if you're lucky, where you pour whatever comes out of you and hope it doesn't come back. Spoiler, it comes back. It seeps, it leaks, it overflows in the rain and rises in the spring. And you begin to understand why no one talks about the smell in polite conversation. It's like the family ghost. It's always there. You just don't name it. Now, some towns had bigger dreams. They tried to build sewers, sort of. But even the word sewer is generous. These were narrow trenches, carved through stone or dirt, often open to the air, snaking between houses like lazy veins filled with disease. They were not deep, they were not covered, and they were never truly dry. Sometimes, if you had coin, your house had a little chute called a garderobe jutting out from an upper floor so you could do your business and let gravity do the rest. Where did it go? Into the moat? If you lived in a castle, onto the street? If you lived in town? Or worst of all, directly down into a pit below, where it sat and waited for a moonless night when someone brave or desperate would come to clear it. You learn quickly not to linger too close to those chutes. Occasionally, something other than waste comes down like a rat, or something still warm. There are recorded cases of people falling through their own toilet holes and drowning in their own cesspits. Yes, really. Historians still argue whether those were accidents or murder made to look like misfortune. Either way, it gives you a new kind of anxiety about late-night trips to the bathroom. Let's talk about the walls, because they don't help. Made of wattle and daub, basically sticks and mud, they don't seal smells. They barely keep in heat. You're always cold. And you're always aware that your house is a sponge for the life happening inside it. And your neighbors, and their neighbors, the cesspits don't stop at your property line. They connect, like a secret underground web of foul intentions. And sometimes, if the ground is too soft, or it rains too much, the pits collapse into each other, creating sinkholes of shared misery. There are medieval records of entire outhouses vanishing overnight, swallowed into bubbling, collapsing earth. Imagine waking up to that your garden now, a crater. Your chickens standing confused beside it. The stench doesn't even surprise you anymore. It's like background noise. The thing no one admits is that you get used to it. Slowly, grudgingly. You stop noticing the flies after a while. You stop gagging every time someone dumps their pot near your front door. You even stop flinching at the little bloated bubbles that rise when it rains and the cesspits burp through the soil. Your sense of smell begins to filter reality into two categories: unbearable and normal. And normal now includes rotting vegetables, damp straw, warm human waste, and the ever-present tang of mold. You don't talk about it. You don't write about it. Medieval literature rarely mentions the sewer experience, not because it didn't exist, but because it was too common to be worth a paragraph. No one needed to describe it. Everyone knew. And if you're thinking, well, maybe the rich had it better, you're half right. They had more privacy, fancier seats, better ventilation. Sometimes they even had servants to carry their chamber pots away. But the destination, still the pit, still the trench, still the slowly seeping earth. A noble's refuse found its way down the same hill as the peasants. And in the end, everyone's legacy flowed into the same stagnant stream behind town. That's the thing about medieval sewage. No matter how high your castle walls, the smell always finds you. And just when you think you've learned to live with it, a storm rolls in. Rain doesn't wash things away here, it stirs them up. The cesspits swell, the streets flood, and suddenly, you're ankle deep in memories you tried to bury. You trudge home, soaked and shivering, and as you lay on your straw-stuffed mattress, listening to the water drip beneath you, you remember that pit is still down there, waiting, full. You wake up, and the first thing you notice isn't light, it's moisture. Not the kind that sparkles or nourishes, but the kind that seeps. It creeps into your bones through the straw mattress, sneaks up your spine, and whispers in your ear that something's rotting. Something's always rotting. The floorboards creak as you step across the room, and beneath them, you hear it a faint squelch, like the earth below your house is breathing back at you. You throw open the shutters to find the street already stained with the night's offerings. A neighbor's chamber pot has overflowed again, and trickles of brownish water race down the stone toward the town's open sewer ditch. This ditch, if you can call it that, is a shallow trench, barely a hand's width deep, carved between houses and alleys, winding like a scar across the town's surface. You know better than to step too close. Everyone knows. These channels don't just carry waste away, they announce it. Every breeze delivers a sample straight to your window, a perfume mix of urine, feces, vomit, and decay, layered with the earthy tang of mud and human sweat. This is the air you grow up in, the air that mothers breathe while nursing, that fathers inhale as they lace their boots, that children learn to ignore the same way they learn to tie their tunics. And just beyond that ditch, a footbridge, barely stable, spanning a wider channel where the runoff gathers. It looks like a stream. It isn't. This is where you learned the meaning of denial. You've always called it a river. It sounds more poetic that way. It runs through the center of your town, shimmering on sunny days like a painter's mistake. But the fish left generations ago, and the only things that thrive in it now are bugs, mold, and the occasional discarded animal carcass. You don't drink from it, at least not directly, but many wells sit too close, and many wooden pails draw up more than just water. Historians still argue whether the great waves of illness that swept through towns were due to these invisible connections, filthy rivers, shared wells, and cesspits that leak silently into every breath, every bowl of soup, every kiss. But for you, the debate is irrelevant. You've already had the boils. You've already watched someone you love cough until they stop moving. All you can do now is live around it, not above it. The town tries, in its own desperate way, to manage the waste. You've seen the signs nailed to tavern doors, declaring new rules about when and where you can dump your pots. Only after sundown. They say, never near the church. They warn. But rules, like walls, are soft when soaked. People dump when they must. People forget. And sometimes, people don't care. Last winter, old Hildy from the North End simply tossed her nightpot out in broad daylight, striking a merchant's apprentice squarely on the shoulder. He slipped in the aftermath, broke his leg, and hasn't walked the same since. The town laughed, then moved on. Hildy still dumps without looking. You learn to walk with your mouth closed. Sometimes, you wonder how anything survives in this environment. But life has a way of finding cracks. In the wet, reeking filth at the base of the ditch, you'll spot bright green moss thriving like it's been given a special blessing. Cats patrol the rim of the trench, noses wrinkled, looking for rats bold enough to surface. And they're bold. Those rats, fat and sleek, too. They scurry along rooftops and dart across alleyways, barely flinching when boot heels slam nearby. They know they rule this place. One time, you watched a rat drag half a sausage into a collapsed gutter. You weren't even mad. You were impressed. You tip your hat to creatures who can live in this and still look clean. The worst part isn't even the sight or the smell, it's the sound. The trickle of wastewater is constant, like a heartbeat you never asked for. It gurgles when the town is quiet, whispers when people sleep. At night, you can hear it change pitch depending on the weather. During storms, it sings louder, swollen with runoff and drowned secrets. During droughts, it becomes a slow pulse, thicker and more reluctant, like it resents being watched. You start to imagine it's sentient, that it's learning, that one day it might rise. It won't, of course, but when you're half asleep and you hear it bubble, you don't feel safe. You feel watched, and yet, somehow, this is still preferable to what came before. There was a time when there were no trenches, when people simply dumped everything wherever they stood, when the only place to run was uphill, and the only solution was the rain. The current system, if you can call it that, was a compromise, a resigned, reluctant improvement. It allowed the town to survive in the loosest sense of the word. But it's not survival you smell when you breathe in the morning air. It's everything the town can't bury fast enough. There's one building near the edge of town, an old bathhouse that never quite recovered after the last illness outbreak. Its roof collapsed 2 winters ago, and now it serves as a kind of informal waste dump. People toss their trash there, their leftovers, even their dead pets. You avoid it. Everyone does. But every so often, someone new comes to town and mistakes it for something useful. You once saw a traveler try to set up camp beside it. Lured by the solid walls, they lasted a night, maybe 2. Then they packed up, eyes watering, and limped off with a new understanding of what smell really means. No matter where you go in this town, the sewer follows. It's in your boots, your clothes, your hair. You can bathe rarely, but you can't escape the imprint. The stench becomes part of your identity. And when someone from another village visits and recoils, you don't take offense. You just smile. They'll adjust, or they'll leave. That's the law of this place: adapt or disappear. You dream sometimes of clean air, of wide fields and running water that doesn't carry yesterday's sins. But even dreams smell faintly of mildew here. You've seen paintings bright, crisp, with blue skies and white robes, and they look like lies. You know what a real robe looks like, stained at the hem, stiff from salt and sweat, and cut short so it doesn't drag in puddles. You know what a real town smells like a mistake that never stops making itself. So, you tie your scarf around your face again, lift your bucket, and step outside. The ditch is waiting, and like every morning, it's not going anywhere. The only people who willingly enter the sewers are the ones paid not to speak of what they see down there, and even then, they rarely speak of it. You see one now, just after dusk, moving like a shadow down the alleyway. He carries a long-handled rake over one shoulder and wears a thick apron so stained it's impossible to tell its original color. This is a gong farmer. No, not a farmer in the romantic, pastoral sense. He farms excrement, human waste, pure and unfiltered. His job to descend into the cesspits, your cesspits, and haul out what you leave behind. Not daily, not even weekly, once a season, maybe, if you're lucky. If not, the pit reminds you. The smell intensifies. The ground softens. Maggots appear near your door. And that's when you pay him quietly, in coin or bread or a flask of something strong to do the one job no one else will. There's a strange respect for the gong farmer. It's not admiration. It's more like an uneasy gratitude, like you might have for a gravedigger who keeps his mouth shut. You know he sees things. He knows what your family eats, how sick your child is, whether your wife's pregnancy ended in blood. All of it flows into the same hole, and he wades in. You nod to him as he passes, and he nods back. the unspoken bond of mutual revulsion connecting you both. Most towns only have one or two gong farmers. The work is too dangerous and too despised to attract more. He works at night, always at night, because no one wants to see what he does. By law, he must announce his presence with a bell or a rattle, a ritual humiliation to warn the town that the sewers are about to be stirred. He enters through a hatch or an old cellar, or sometimes just a rotting floorboard, and what he finds is rarely what he expects. Bones, jewelry, half-decayed bundles of cloth that might have once been alive. Historians still argue whether the cesspits were ever used as deliberate hiding places for secrets, or if people were just that careless. But either way, the gong farmer knows more than he says. And it's not just the contents of the pit that are dangerous. The air itself is poison. Methane, ammonia, the kind of suffocating fumes that build up slowly until a single spark or a deep breath sends someone staggering backward, choking, eyes watering. You've heard the stories how one man passed out mid-shovel and was pulled out hours later with skin blistered from the gas. You've heard the whisper of pits catching fire, a brief, horrifying eruption that cooked the contents into something even worse. No one ever investigates. No one wants to get close. The gong farmer recovers if he can, dies if he doesn't, and is replaced only after someone gets drunk enough to try. Sometimes, he takes the waste to a dumping ground outside the town, a field no one farms, a stretch of marsh where nothing grows. Other times, he spreads it along the roadsides, a thin, awful smear that mixes with rain and horse dung until the smell is too familiar to notice. And yes, sometimes he's paid to dump it into the river. It's illegal, but the laws are written in ink and the stench is real. You don't ask questions when he passes, you just move aside and let the rake do its work. There's a certain rhythm to his labor. You hear it in the scrape of the bucket, the splash of thick sludge into a cart, the groan of old wood under weight. It's almost hypnotic if you listen long enough, like the heartbeat of a town trying not to gag. The children are fascinated. They whisper about him in alleys, dare each other to follow him, run screaming when he glances their way. You remember being that child. You remember the thrill of standing near the open pit, daring the void to reach up and pull you in. You remember the smell clinging to your clothes for days. That's how memory works here, through scent, through sickness, through silence. It's not just the pits. The entire waste system, if you can call it that, is held together by desperation. Some households build wooden chutes from their upper floors to direct waste away from the front door, hoping gravity does a better job than planning. Others dig shallow ditches behind the house and pray the neighbors don't complain. A few dig too deep and strike an older pit, long forgotten, full of nightmares that rise like ghosts. You've seen one of these unearthed a collapsed garden wall, revealing a black cavern of filth beneath, centuries old, undisturbed until now. The smell didn't just emerge, it attacked. Birds flew off, dogs howled, people vomited where they stood, and the worst part, they sealed it back up. No investigation, no records, just dirt over dirt, as if pretending it wasn't there could undo the truth. The gong farmer doesn't flinch. He's seen worse. He always sees worse. His hands are cracked from lime, his face creased from smoke and strain, and yet he returns night after night because someone must. You begin to wonder what he thinks about as he works. Does he judge? Does he dream of clean places? Or has the stench replaced everything soft inside him? Once, after a festival, you saw him sitting alone by the edge of town, rake resting on his knees, staring into a bucket that steamed in the cold. You almost said something. You didn't. What is there to say to someone who knows your insides better than your physician? It's easy to joke about it, the smells, the buckets, the rats. But when you think about the life of the gong farmer, the humor drains away. There's no comedy in a man dying faceless in a pit. No punchline in a town held together by the willingness of one person to do what everyone else fears. And yet, without him, everything collapses. He is the linchpin of your hygiene, the quiet guardian of your dinner table. Without his work, the pits rise, the sewers overflow, and your home becomes unlivable in a matter of days. You owe him more than coin. You owe him breath. And so, when the bell rings tonight, you know what it means. You hold your children close, close your shutters tight, and try not to imagine what the man with the rake is wading through Tomorrow morning, the street will smell just slightly better, the ditch will look just slightly clearer, and life, for now, will continue. That's how it works here. The filth returns, and so does the farmer. You don't mean to look, but your eyes always drift toward the river, or rather, what everyone insists on calling a river. It runs through the middle of the town like a misplaced vein, brown and sluggish, choking its way past homes and marketplaces and forgotten alleyways. Sometimes, it glistens in the sun, but not the way a clean stream sparkles. No, this gleam has an oily shimmer, like it's been touched by something unholy. You wonder how long it's been since anything swam in that water that wasn't already half dead. The locals say there used to be fish trout, even eels, but you've never seen one. What you've seen are floating scraps of cloth, old shoes, clumps of hair, and more than one bloated carcass that used to be a goat or a cat, or you're not quite sure. You learn not to ask, and you absolutely, definitely do not drink from it. Though, of course, you know someone who does. Everyone knows someone who does. A cousin, a stubborn grandparent, a drunken man in the market who fills his skin flask straight from the river's edge and dares you to stop him. You don't, you just wait. Sometimes he survives. Sometimes he doesn't. But the worst part isn't even the water you can see. It's what you can't. The hidden exchanges below the surface where waste dumped from the upper town slips into the current and wins its way downstream, past laundry lines, past drinking wells, past schools and churches. Historians still argue whether this is what fueled the worst outbreaks, whether this liquid parasite running through towns turned entire communities into graveyards. Some say it wasn't the river, but the rats. Others blame the wind. But you don't need a historian to tell you this water is cursed. You just need a nose, or a memory. You've seen the patterns. A sickness starts with a cough, becomes a fever, then a rash, and finally a silence. It always starts near the river, always. There's a saying in town that no one repeats near children if it dies upstream. It drinks downstream. Grim. Yes, but accurate. You've watched carts dump slop into the water, the overflow from kitchens, the remnants of animal stalls, even the contents of chamber pots, and once it's in, it doesn't leave. It just moves, slow and deliberate, like it's thinking about where to go next. Sometimes, when the wind is right, the smell drifts into your home and settles into the walls. No amount of burning sage or herbs drives it out. It clings, like guilt. One time, during a particularly hot summer, the river stopped moving. The whole town seemed to hold its breath with it. The surface went still, thickened into something that looked more like soup than water. That was the summer the flies came. Not one or two hordes. Black clouds that rose from the river like smoke, that crawled through every open window, that buzzed around your eyes when you tried to sleep. The apothecaries sold out of every remedy they could concoct, none of which worked. People resorted to hanging dried flowers and garlic, and even old shoes over their doors, hoping the smell would repel the other smell. It didn't. For weeks, the town felt like a waiting room for the next disaster. And still, people lived here. They built homes near the water, told stories beside it, even held weddings not far from its banks. You once watched a couple vow their love within earshot of the sewer mouth. The priest tried to talk over the buzz of flies. The bride's train dragged through the damp earth, and no one commented. It was just the way things were. You wonder now if that marriage lasted. You wonder if their children ever played near the riverbank, chasing frogs that shouldn't exist, laughing while the water muttered secrets just beneath their feet. Of course, the river isn't entirely useless. It's still used for washing. Not laundry, you'd be insane. But tools, boots, carts, sometimes animals. You've seen someone splash water on their face, too. They always regret it. Yet there's something mesmerizing about it. Even now, late at night, when the town sleeps and the moonlight catches the slow ripple, it almost looks peaceful. Almost, but you know better. You know what's beneath the surface. You've helped drag things out of it. Once, during a flood, the water rose so high it swallowed half the lower district. People tied planks between rooftops to stay dry. Others used barrels as boats. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so horrifying. You remember wading through knee-deep water to save a child's toy that had floated away? You told yourself it was noble. Later, when the rash appeared, you knew better. The apothecary didn't know what to call it. They gave you a paste made from crushed beetles and ash. It stung. It didn't help. You were lucky. Though, some weren't. The river doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It just flows when it feels like it, and when it doesn't, it sits and waits, collecting whatever the town dares to give. Some claim there are things that live down there, deep in the muck, older than the town itself. Creatures, spirits, diseases that have learned to mimic life. You don't believe all of it, but you believe enough. You've seen the glint of something watching you from beneath the sewer grate. You've heard the gurgle that sounded too much like a voice. Once, a pig vanished during market day. It had wandered too close to the edge. They found its bell the next day, half submerged and rusted. No sign of the animal. You don't tell children these stories, but they already know. Kids always know what adults pretend not to. During festival days, the townspeople toss flower petals into the river, part of some ancient tradition meant to honor the water spirits. You think it's a bribe, or maybe an apology. You once watched a little girl lean over and whisper into the current, as if the river could hear her. Maybe it could, maybe it does. You've never dared to do it yourself, and so you live with it. You avoid it when you can, respect it when you must, and curse it when you're alone. It gives nothing. It takes everything. It reminds you, every single day, that no matter how high your window, how clean your hands, or how fresh your bread, the town's filth flows through all of you. They say the rats arrived before the people did. That before the first stone house rose from the earth, before the first market stall sold its rotten apples, before the first church bell rang out across the fog. The rats were already there waiting. It sounds like a myth, the kind of thing told to frighten children into cleaning their rooms. But after living here, you start to believe it. Rats don't just scurry through this town. They inhabit it. They own it. You see one now, darting along the narrow lip of the gutter trench outside your door. Tail twitching like it's thinking about something complicated. It stops, looks up at you as if to ask what your problem is, then disappears through a crack in the stone that you hadn't noticed before. And now that you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Every step, every corner, every rafter in this town hides the memory of rats. Sometimes you hear them at night, chewing on wood or dragging something heavy across your ceiling. Sometimes, if you leave bread out for too long, they come to thank you personally. You once tried to trap them. Everyone does, at first, but they are too smart, too fast, too many. You learned the hard way that a rat will gnaw through your wall, through your food, through your peace of mind. There was one winter when they took over the grain store. The town tried to fight back. Traps were laid, cats were deployed, dogs were trained to sniff them out. It helped for a while, until the cats disappeared, and then the dogs. You found one dog whimpering under the tavern steps, eyes wide with something like shame. No wounds, just fear. The rats had won, again. You stopped leaving your bread out after that. They're not like modern rats, those twitchy little things that flinch at light. These rats walk like they have somewhere to be. They're fat, shiny, and alert. They look healthy, which is horrifying when you think about it. What are they eating? You don't want to know, but you do, because you've seen them drag more than food into their nests. You've seen them tug at things that used to belong to people, things that used to be people. That story about the gong farmer who found a hand in the sewer, no one doubts it. The only question is whether the rats put it there or took it from somewhere else. Historians still argue whether medieval rat populations were truly to blame for every plague, or if they're just the scapegoat history likes to gnaw on. But you don't argue. You don't need science to tell you that these creatures are dangerous. You've lived beside them. You've heard them in the walls while you were sick with fever, whispering behind the plaster like old women gossiping about your chances of survival. One winter, you woke up with a hole chewed through your boot. Not just the leather, through the felt, through the lining. You found droppings inside. It felt like a message. You don't remember what you dreamed that night, but you remember waking up sweating, clutching your blanket like it could protect you. It couldn't. Nothing does. And the worst part, you grow used to them. Just like the smell. just like the muck, just like everything else in this place that should send you running. You develop a kind of mutual tolerance. You pretend not to notice them underfoot in the market, and they pretend not to bite unless absolutely necessary. One time, you dropped a piece of meat in the alley. By the time you bent to pick it up, it was already gone, dragged into a hole you couldn't reach, probably to be shared among a family of 30. You didn't even get mad. You just nodded. Fair game. You've seen them swimming, too, in the river, in the cesspits, even across the moat outside the city gate. Yes, the moat. You'd think that body of water would serve as a barrier, a last line of defense, but it's not. The rats glide across it like champions, sleek and casual, making a mockery of your illusions about protection. The guards joke about them, call them the night patrol, but it's not a funny joke. Not really. Because you know the rats are watching. They always are. You remember the time a child went missing, just vanished. No one wanted to say it. No one wanted to think it. But the search stopped at the sewer grate. People claimed they heard something squeaking below. Others said it was just water. But no one opened the grate. No one even tried. Instead, they threw a few candles down, muttered a prayer, and sealed it tighter. The mother moved away soon after. The rats stayed. The baker keeps his dough in sealed barrels now. The innkeeper sleeps with his boots on, afraid they'll be chewed through again. One carpenter claims he saw a rat light a candle. You laugh at that out loud, even, but you also sleep with a knife under your pillow. Not for burglars. For the soft sound of paws on stone, they leave signs, piles of chewed wood, tiny scratch marks near your bedpost, a tail disappearing just as you open a cupboard, and the smell sharp, acrid, with a sweetness that turns your stomach. You can track them by scent if you want to, but you don't. You don't want to know where they nest, because once you find one nest, you realize they're everywhere. They live beneath the floor, inside the walls, in the rafters. They're a second population, quieter, hungrier. You hear rumors of entire buildings abandoned because the rats refused to leave. One apothecary's shop stood empty for a year after he disappeared. No one would rent it. The rats had taken over. They scurried visibly through the windows at night, their shadows stretching long across the walls. Eventually, someone bricked up the doorway, not to renovate, to contain. And still, they don't stop coming. A fresh litter is born every few weeks. They adapt, they survive, they outthink traps, they chew through stone. You've seen one climb a vertical wall using only a drain pipe and malice. You've seen one kill a bird. You didn't think that was possible. Now you know better. So you live with them. You learn their habits. You stop leaving crumbs. You tap on floorboards before stepping down. You hang your bread from the ceiling. You tell your children bedtime stories where the heroes outsmart rats, not dragons. You lie awake some nights, listening to them move below you, behind you, within reach, and you pretend you're not afraid. But you are. You always imagine monasteries as sanctuaries, places removed from the filth of common life, places where silence hummed and holiness gleamed from every stone. But the first time you step inside one and catch a whiff of the latrine trench behind the cloister wall, your fantasies crumble faster than stale bread. Monks, for all their prayers and penance, still produce waste like everyone else, and they too have to deal with it. In fact, monasteries were often some of the earliest institutions to attempt organized sanitation. The problem is, organization doesn't always mean success. You walk the cloister path, trailing your fingers along the cool stone, and the illusion holds until you round the corner and see the open drain running behind the dormitory. It's not hidden. It's not even covered. Just a narrow channel carved into the ground, meant to carry waste away from the latrines and out to, well, somewhere. Sometimes a nearby stream, sometimes a dedicated cesspit, sometimes just a shallow trench beyond the garden wall, where the smell mingles with lavender and sage in an unholy perfume. You peek into one of the monastic privies. The door creaks open and reveals a long wooden bench, with several evenly spaced holes, like a row of contemplative mouths yawning into the void. You'd laugh if the air didn't make your eyes water. This is where monks go to relieve themselves. In silence, in humility, in shared discomfort. There are no partitions, no privacy, just the soft echo of habits rustling and the occasional plop echoing into stone. You imagine the paradox, reciting verses about purity while seated above a pit of mortal reminder. But the monks don't complain. This is their rhythm, a blend of scripture, service, and sewage. You wonder if holiness smells different when you're used to it. And here's the catch: monasteries were often praised for their cleanliness. Compared to the average peasant household, they had scheduled cleanings, rules about waste disposal, even latrine duties rotated among the brothers. But all of that order still revolved around very medieval infrastructure, meaning gravity, buckets, and prayer. The waste flowed through open channels, which the monks would sometimes cover with flat stones to reduce the smell, or maybe just the visibility. But rain would wash it away into the garden channels, which watered the vegetables, which fed the monks. It's a perfect system, if you ignore the part where human waste fertilizes your carrots. And they did. Monks were nothing if not practical. One particularly ambitious order tried to build an early flushing system, a stream diverted through the latrines, washing waste downstream with holy water efficiency. It worked, for a while, until the winter freeze cracked the channels and redirected the flow right through the herbarium. For weeks, every medicinal tincture smelled faintly of something that wasn't thyme. Historians still debate whether that monastery's sudden reputation for healing miracles had anything to do with desperate monks bottling herbs that had been well aged in something warmer than compost. But monks were also scribes, and scribes record everything, which means we have some of the most detailed descriptions of medieval sanitation from these very cloisters. One record you read, scrawled in a trembling hand, described a miasma of foul vapors rising from the southern trench, so powerful it disturbed the meditations of 3 brothers. The abbot ordered incense burned nonstop for a week. Another monk, clearly fed up, simply wrote, "Let no one sit at the 3rd hole. It is cursed." You wonder what happened at that 3rd hole. You decide never to ask. Despite all this, the monastery still stands as one of the more refined places to relieve oneself in the medieval world. Here, at least, the waste is acknowledged. There are rules about it, processes, and a deeply ingrained understanding that filth is both physical and spiritual. Penance and privies go hand in hand. You sin, you confess, you shovel. A monk who has scrubbed latrine stones with vinegar-soaked rags knows the meaning of humility in ways sermons could never teach. You've seen it in their eyes, a kind of calm acceptance, not just of dirt, but of the truth dirt reveals. You can't escape what you are, even under robes. Even in prayer. You once spoke to a brother who handled the latrine maintenance, not in confession, just in conversation. He was soft-spoken, eyes kind, hands cracked from lye and cold water. You asked him if the work ever made him angry or weary. He smiled, then said, "When I clean the waste of others, I remember how much of my own God has had to overlook." You didn't know what to say to that. You still don't, but you've never forgotten it. And even monasteries aren't immune to pests. Rats live here, too. Birds sometimes fall through the open roofs and land, unfortunately, directly in the trench. There was a time when the cloister cat, a sleek little thing named Peregrine, leapt onto the privy bench mid-use. The monk, it startled, refused to enter again without incense and supervision. These stories passed quietly from brother to brother, growing funnier with each telling, like a joke passed through centuries. Because even in the holiest places, you need laughter, especially where it stinks. One monastery in the northern hills attempted an early compost system, mixing human waste with straw and ash, letting it sit for months before using it on crops. It was progressive. It was logical. It was also raided by wolves, attracted by the smell of fermenting humanity. You've read the note left by the prior. Let it be known that no sanitation method, however clever, is worth the loss of Brother Thomas. It's carved on a plaque near the old compost heap you've never visited. Even in towns that feared God but forgot to bathe, monasteries were respected for trying to separate clean from unclean, trying to redeem the body while acknowledging its mess. And in a strange way, that's what made their waste systems more tragic. They were aware. They tried to do better, but the tools weren't there. The knowledge wasn't ready. And so, like everyone else, they relied on hope, on wood, on holes in the ground, and prayers to heaven that nothing backed up. And sometimes it did. Heavy rains turned cloister paths into rivulets of runoff, latrines overflowed, the southern trench breached in 1324 and monks had to evacuate the scriptorium when the floor grew soft. For months, no new manuscripts were copied, partly because the ink smelled like something awful, partly because no one wanted to kneel on damp flagstones while trying to translate Augustine. You walk through the monastery again, nose slightly wrinkled, and wonder how they did it, day after day, in robes that touched the floor, in sandals that slipped on mossy stone. But you also see their quiet resilience, their adaptation, buckets filled, grates cleared, pits dug. You wonder if maybe spiritual discipline and latrine maintenance aren't so different after all. Both require daily attention, both stink when ignored, and both, when done right, go unnoticed because peace often comes not from what you add, but from what you remove. There's a strange romance people carry about castles. From a distance, they rise out of the earth like monuments to powerstone towers piercing the sky, banners fluttering in the wind, arrow slits staring down at the world like judgmental gods. You think of kings brooding from balconies, queens walking marble halls, goblets raised in celebration, but no one ever talks about the part of the castle that stinks. No one tells you about the latrines that hang over the courtyard wall like stone chins jutting from the keep. They're called garderobes. Sounds elegant, right? Like a place for cloaks and courtly whispers. But a medieval garderobe is anything but. It's a tiny, closet-sized room with a hole in the seat, and under that hole is nothing, or everything. Depending on where in the castle you're seated, you climb into one and immediately understand why no tapestries hang there. The walls are damp, the draft is constant, and the smell, even royalty, couldn't escape that smell. The waste falls freely straight down into the moat if you're lucky, into a pit if you're not, and onto unsuspecting servants if you're truly cursed. And there were curses. Trust me. The moat, that famous defensive feature ringing the castle like a stagnant necklace, was often the final resting place for all things unpleasant, rotten food, animal carcasses, and, of course, human waste from the noble privies above. You stand at the edge of one now, staring at the opaque water below, watching something thick and slow ripple beneath the surface. You don't want to know what it is. No one does. The idea of the pristine moat as a strategic asset makes sense until you realize it also functions as an open sewer. During sieges, it only gets worse. No one leaves the castle. No one empties the pits. The garderobes keep filling. The smell intensifies. And eventually, when the moat overflows, it floods back through the lower halls. There's nothing glorious about this. Siege journals describe soldiers gagging in their helmets, castle cats fleeing through arrow slits, and nobles bathing in rosewater to escape the unbearable stench. And let's not pretend the architecture helped much. Medieval builders were ingenious. Yes, but not miracle workers. Waste pipes were rare, often carved from stone or lead, and almost always clogged. One castle in Wales installed a double chute system that was supposed to separate liquid from solid. It worked fine until winter, when everything froze and backed up into the servant quarters. Historians still argue whether the Great Freeze of 1286 was meteorological or architectural. Either way, servants refused to enter the lower halls for weeks. You can imagine the scent that lingered. Even the throne room, the literal seat of power, was not far from the stench. The king might be wrapped in velvet and weighed down with gold, but his waist went where everyone else's did down. There's an old joke, whispered in kitchens, that the king rules from above and defecates from the same height. It's not funny to the maids who have to clean the stone under his chambers, or the cooks in the kitchens just below, who sometimes report mysterious drips from the ceiling beams. You once worked a winter at a castle like this, scrubbing floors with vinegar and ash, praying the draft didn't carry something worse than cold. It did. The memory still clings to your coat. There's a secret, too, that castle guides never tell the tourist the higher your rank. The further your waist has to fall, nobles in upper towers had garderobes that emptied into vertical shafts, sometimes 2, 3, even 4 stories high. Imagine being a stable boy sleeping near the base of that shaft, waking up to a splash you didn't deserve. It happened, frequently, and when storms came, or the wind blew just right or just wrong, the contents of those shafts didn't always stay within their bounds. You'd hear a sudden shriek from the courtyard, followed by a groaning acceptance. The phrase caught off guard takes on a whole new meaning when applied to open-air sewage. Castle architects tried to be clever. Some garderobes were built over corners or outer walls, directing waste into surrounding ditches. Others added rudimentary flaps or slanted chutes to prevent backflow during storms. It worked, sometimes. Other times, not so much. One noblewoman famously refused to use her castle's privy after a rat leapt through the chute mid-use. She had an ornate wooden chair fitted with a chamber pot instead placed, rather regally, in front of the fireplace. You wonder if she ever invited guests while sitting. Medieval manners, as you've learned, were more flexible than people assume. Then there were the castles with no garderobes at all, just chamber pots, one for each bedchamber, emptied by servants, if they remembered, or by hand, if they didn't. These pots sat tucked into corners or under beds, sloshing quietly every time someone walked across the room. You grew up in a household like this, under a lesser noble, and you still remember the sound it made in the dark, the terror of knocking one over, the utter humiliation of realizing, too late, that someone forgot to empty it. The servants had contests to see who could carry two at once without spilling. You were never brave enough to try. And don't let the stone fool you. Castle walls may look sturdy, but they breathe. Moisture creeps in, odors settle in crevices, mold blooms behind tapestries. One castle in France was so damp that even the royal dogs refused to sleep indoors. The guards used to line the garderobe shaft with pine branches in the winter, hoping it would mask the smell. It didn't. Nothing masks the smell. You begin to suspect the only reason royalty burned so much incense was because they were all too polite to admit what the place really smelled like. The truth is, power doesn't protect you from your body. You can sit on a gold-embroidered cushion and still be one sneeze away from an accident. You can feast on quail and honey and still groan over a bucket in the middle of the night. You've seen lords doubled over after a bad oyster, calling for their priest and their chamber pot in the same breath. You've seen princesses whisper prayers while clutching their stomachs. Disease didn't care if you had a title. Dysentery leveled dukes and dairymaids alike. And when it came, it always reminded everyone that beneath the brocade and silk, every body ends the same way in stink. So the next time you hear someone wax poetic about the romance of castle life, ask them if they know what a moat smells like in July. Ask them how it feels to sit on a stone hole with the wind whistling up at you, carrying the ghost of every meal you've ever regretted. Ask them if they've ever tried to clean a garderobe shaft with a broom tied to a rope and a prayer. They'll go quiet. They always do. Because the truth of castles is not just in the crowns or the armor or the stained glass. It's in the waste, in the walls, in the wind that carries everything down. No matter how high you sit, you wake up needing to relieve yourself, and suddenly you remember you're out of moss. That's a problem. A very scratchy, very uncomfortable problem. Because in the medieval world, what comes after the squat is often worse than the act itself. There's no toilet paper, no soft roll hanging beside you, no flush of modern luxury. What you wipe with depends entirely on where you are, how desperate you feel, and how much you're willing to risk for comfort. Today, you're in trouble. The scrap of linen you were saving used up. The handful of straw tucked behind the bench, gone. Probably claimed by a rat during the night. That one leaf you thought about. Turns out it was stinging nettle. Lesson learned. Now you sit, trousers halfway, staring at your options and wondering what your ancestors were thinking. The truth is, they weren't, not in any organized, systematized way. What passed for toilet paper in the Middle Ages was mostly whatever you could get your hands on, literally. Straw, moss, wool scraps, hay. Sometimes even feathers or cloth torn from old garments. Richer households might have access to rags that could be reused washed by servants in grim silence, but the average peasant had no such luxury. You've heard of people wiping with smooth stones, even seashells. One chronicler wrote about a man who kept a clay shard beside his privy, pleasantly curved, and twice as efficient as moss. You tried something similar once. You bled for 3 days. Never again. And of course, there were the truly desperate measures. Snow. If it was winter, your own tunic hem. If you were far from home, a handful of grass if you were lucky, a handful of weeds if you weren't. One traveler claimed to have wiped with a dead squirrel once. You assume he meant the tail, but he didn't clarify, and you didn't ask. Historians still debate whether certain regional practices like using soft bark or corn cobs were common, or just unfortunate anomalies. You don't need a historian to tell you it's all terrible. You've lived it. You start to envy animals. They just go and move on. No cleanup, no shame, just instinct and soil. But humans, with our upright posture and complicated ideas about cleanliness, need closure. And medieval closure is rudimentary. There's a communal pit behind the tavern, a slanted plank with a hole carved in it, and a bucket of rainwater to rinse your hands if you're feeling fancy. There's nothing provided for wiping. You're meant to bring your own, or improvise. Someone once left a page from a religious pamphlet hanging on a nail. It was gone within an hour. You don't know if that counts as sacrilegious, but you remember thinking it was the softest paper you'd ever used. You've heard that some monasteries use cloth strips soaked in vinegar for sanitation, then reuse them, washed, wrung out, and rehung for the next brother. The mind reels. The nose reels harder. But again, practicality wins. When comfort is rare and options are few, medieval folk chose what they had over what they wanted. And often, they chose wrong. You've seen friends with rashes, cuts, infections, little miscalculations that turned into long weeks of limping. You once watched a man try to use sheep's wool. He swore it was a stroke of genius, until it didn't come out cleanly. You didn't ask how long it took. And beyond discomfort, there's shame. Medieval culture didn't like to talk about the act itself, but everyone judged the aftermath. If your clothes bore stains, people noticed. If your smell lingered, people whispered. And so, people began to hide their wiping materials, hoarding moss like treasure, trading rags in hushed exchanges behind barns and at market stalls. There were rumors of a merchant who sold bundles of blessed cloth, guaranteed to purify. It was just flax. Still, people paid. You once traded half a loaf of bread for a pouch of dry lichen. Worth it. There were even attempts at luxury. Nobles, always seeking distinction, sometimes imported cloth from far-off regions, Egyptian linen, dyed silk, even discarded strips of old robes. One story tells of a queen who insisted on wiping only with rose petals. You find that hard to believe. But if you had servants to pick them, who knows you, of course, have no such petals. Just the memory of a rough handful of straw and a sigh that turns into a cough. It's worse during travel. Public latrines are rare and rarely cleaned. Most people relieve themselves in fields or forests, behind carts or under bridges. Travelers carry bundles of wiping materials with them, small sacks tied to belts, filled with whatever won't rot too quickly. You've learned to scout good foliage in advance, wide leaves, smooth edges. You once saw a traveler use a rabbit pelt. You didn't know whether to be impressed or horrified. Maybe both. You didn't shake his hand. And it's not just about the material. It's about disposal. What do you do with it after, if it's straw or moss? You toss it into the trench. If it's cloth, you rinse it sometimes in the same basin used for dishes. You try not to think about that. You've seen cloth drying beside cooking pots. You've eaten in that kitchen. You don't anymore. You hear stories, too, of mishaps and misfortunes. A man who mistook poison ivy for dock leaves. Another who tried to wipe with parchment from the mayor's proclamation. A third who used both hands, then forgot which was which. These tales are told with laughter, but behind them is a nervous truth. Wiping is a gamble. Every time, one wrong choice can ruin your week, or worse. And through it all, you keep wishing for something soft, something safe, something made for this. You've dreamed of cloth that appears clean every time, of a tiny room with a flushing seat and a roll of endless cotton. It feels impossible, like magic, like something only the gods would use. You once heard a bard sing of a distant land where people sat on porcelain thrones and wiped with paper softer than lamb's ears. The crowd laughed. You didn't. You wanted it to be real. Because after all the rats, the smells, the flooding garderobes and cursed pits, sometimes what you long for most is a clean wipe. A single, painless moment of dignity. Not a handful of hay, Not a lichen-covered stone, just a gesture that reminds you that despite everything, you are still human. You still care about comfort, even when surrounded by filth. So, you gather your courage, reach for that last shred of sackcloth, and do what needs to be done. It's rough, it's cold, but it's enough. For now. You wake to coughing. Not yours this time, someone outside. Just beyond your shutters. Hacking with a deep, wet rattle that makes your stomach twist. You know that sound. It's not the kind of cough that comes from cold air or dry throats. It's the kind that doesn't stop, the kind that ends in silence. You lie still for a moment, listening. Another cough joins in, then another. This is how it starts. Again. Disease moves like fog in this town, slow, quiet, and full of filth. And always, it starts in the lower quarter, near the ditches, near the pit. You already know the routine. People pretend it's nothing, just a winter chill. Then the apothecary runs out of vinegar. Then the church bell rings too many times in one day. Then the wagons come, you throw on your cloak and step outside, trying not to breathe through your nose. It's not superstition. You've seen it happen too many times. Waste and disease go hand in hand, clutched together like lovers who can't be torn apart. When the sewers rise, so does death. Not instantly, not dramatically, just steadily. A fever here, a rash there, a child who doesn't wake, a mother who stops speaking, and always, always, the ground is wet beneath them. You've walked through alleyways where the cobblestones squish, not with water, but with something thicker. The runoff from overflowing pits, from chamber pots dumped too close to sleeping spaces, from the broken pipes beneath the butcher's stall that leak behind the walls and feed the rats. You've watched a man cough blood into his hands, then stagger past a gutter choked with last week's waste. You knew before he did. He wouldn't live out the week. Historians still argue whether it was the rats, or the water, or the air. They name things like Yersinia pestis, draw maps of plague routes, count the bodies with academic detachment, but you don't need a scholar to tell you what you already know. In your bones. It's the filth. All of it. The layers of human rot that fester beneath your floorboards. The wet earth that never dries. The trenches that trickle with more than just rainwater. It isn't science. It's common sense. You can smell the death before it knocks. Last summer, the town tried to clean up. A royal decree from somewhere far away demanded improved sanitation. They posted signs, assigned buckets, hired boys to clear the ditches. For 2 weeks, things smelled a little better. The water in the gutter ran clear for one whole day. Then the storm came. The ditches backed up. The pits overflowed. The boys ran away. And the signs rotted off their posts. Nothing changed. You can't legislate against mud. Not here. Not when the waste lives with you. You remember your neighbor's face when her child started coughing. That quiet fear behind her smile. That desperate hope that it wasn't the same thing. Not this time. That maybe it would pass, but it never does. It waits. The illness waits in puddles, in rags, in the water you wash with, in the food you cook. A small cut turns red, then black. A scratch becomes a boil. Your breath thickens. You feel heat when there's no fire. And by the time the priest comes, you've already stopped speaking. The wealthier folk flee first. They always do. They load wagons with salted meat and sour wine and ride to estates on high ground, where the wind smells like pine and not people. But even there, the servants carry the city in their boots. The stink doesn't wash off. The sickness doesn't care how high the hill. You once knew a cook who served a lord 20 miles from town. The cook's nephew came to visit, brought cheese and a story from the gutter. The lord was dead in 4 days. The cheese stayed on the table. You've stopped asking for explanations. You've stopped believing in protection. You just boil your water twice. If you have time, you wash your hands with ash. You avoid the butcher's stall where the blood leaks down into the drain that hasn't flowed in months. And you pray not for salvation, but for time. Time before the next wave. Time before the coughing comes from inside your house. Time to move your bed higher. To seal the cracks near the door. To steal a cloth soaked in vinegar and breathe through it like a coward. People have rituals now. Superstitions. They hang garlic above doors. They burn herbs in the corners of rooms. One woman swears by onions tied to her belt. Another insists on placing a frog in a bowl under the bed. You laugh, but only when you're alone, because you've done stranger things. You've whispered apologies to the ditch water as you passed. You've held your breath walking by the rat nests. You once threw a silver button into the gutter as an offering. You told yourself it was for luck. You knew better. There was a healer once, from the eastern mountains, who claimed he could smell sickness before it arrived. People called him mad. Then, 3 days later, the fever came. Just as he'd said, he vanished after that. Some say he left town. Others say the waste took him. You hope he found clean air somewhere. You hope such a place still exists. But here, death smells like vinegar and rot. It tastes like damp bread. It walks on bare feet through your hallway and leaves muddy prints behind. You stop lighting candles because the flies keep gathering. You eat cold stew from a tin plate and tell yourself you're lucky. And you are, because for now, you're not coughing. For now, you're standing. You walk past a body wrapped in cloth and don't flinch. You help carry it to the pile near the edge of town. No one cries anymore. Tears feel extravagant. Even the priests are quieter now. The sermons sound more like farewells than lessons. The prayers are shorter. You've seen one weep behind the altar, wiping his face with the same cloth he used to clean the chalice. You didn't say anything. You just nodded, because faith is fragile when everything stinks. Some say the town is cursed, that we built too close to something ancient, that the river runs over a forgotten grave, that the soil was never meant to grow anything but death. Maybe they're right. Or maybe it's just what happens when people live too close for too long without washing. So you go home, bolt the door, and sit by the fire, if you can light one. You check your skin for spots. You breathe shallowly through a cloth. You listen to the sounds outside, the coughs, the footsteps, the silence, and you wait. Because in a town built on waste, disease isn't a visitor, it's a neighbor, and it always comes back. You sit on the edge of your stool, elbows on your knees, and listen to the clatter of a chamber pot being emptied somewhere down the lane. You've heard that sound your whole life. It has a rhythm now, part of the town's daily music. The splash, the grunt, the muted curse as the wind catches a drop and flings it back. But what you notice more than the sound is who's doing it. Women. Always women. In every house, from the narrowest peasant shack to the homes of modest merchants, it's the women who manage the waste. Not because they want to, not because they're built for it, but because someone has to, and no one else will. You've watched your mother tip a sloshing pot out the back door with the same bored grace she used to ladle soup. You've watched your sister scrape dried stains from floorboards while your brother pretended not to see. It's understood, unspoken, normal, which doesn't make it right. There's a hierarchy to filth, and women live at the bottom of it. While men chop wood and haggle over oxen in the square, women are rinsing soiled linens in gray water, scrubbing bowls streaked with sickness, and emptying the pot that sits in the bedroom corner, catching every sound in the night. You remember helping once. You were small, barely old enough to hold the handle. The weight of it surprised you. So did the heat and the smell. God, the smell. You gagged, and your mother snapped at you. Not out of cruelty, but exhaustion. It's just waste, she said, same as yours. That stayed with you. You never offered to help again. Neither did your brothers. Some women try to keep their dignity. Even in this, they tie scarves around their faces, hum while they carry the load, call it taking the wash. But everyone knows. The walk, the angle of the pot, the cautious step, it's unmistakable. You've watched a young bride, barely 16, struggle to lift a pot nearly her size, cheeks red with effort and shame. Her husband sat nearby, mending his boots. He didn't look up. That's how the world is shaped here quietly, by the hands no one praises. And the chamber pots aren't the only burden. Cloths must be boiled, floors must be scrubbed, babies must be cleaned, even when they soil their only blanket in the dead of winter. Who tends to it? Not the priest, not the blacksmith, not the physician with his jars of leeches. It's the women daughters, Mothers, midwives who kneel beside the mess and make the world livable again. It's their work that keeps the house from drowning in its own stink. You know this. Everyone does. But no one thanks them. Thanks. You remember old Nan, the washerwoman, bent-backed, fingers wrinkled from years of lye and water. She knew every stain by name. She could tell who'd been ill and who'd been careless, just by the smell of their linens. She used to sing while she worked low, broken songs you couldn't quite understand. You once asked her why she sang, to keep the gag down, she said, then laughed until she wheezed. Nan died last winter. Her daughter took over the washing. She doesn't sing. Historians like to write about kings and feasts, battles and betrayals. They rarely write about the woman kneeling behind the privy with a cracked bucket and a cloth too thin to scrub with. But without her, nothing works. The town collapses into disease, disorder, and despair. You start to think the only reason anyone survived at all was because some woman somewhere was still willing to lift a pot. And it isn't just the labor, it's the judgment. If your house smells, people assume your wife is lazy. If your children look unwashed, they blame their mother. If your sheets are stiff with filth, someone whispers that the lady of the house lacks pride. You've heard it, you've said it, and now you regret it, because you've seen what it takes. The scalded hands, the bruised knees, the eyes that stop looking at anything except the next task. Sometimes the waste freezes in the pots overnight. You've seen women chisel it out with knives, teeth clenched against the cold, steam rising around them like some grotesque halo. Other times, it overflows in the summer heat, attracting flies that refuse to leave, no matter how many sprigs of mint you hang from the rafters. And through it all, the women keep moving, because no one else will, because the work doesn't wait. You once saw a merchant's wife carry out her husband's pot, while he scolded a servant for tracking mud on the floor. He didn't see the irony. She did. You watched her pause, just for a second, before dumping the contents into the gutter. The wind caught her hair. She looked like she might scream. Instead, she went back inside. You've thought about that moment for years. Even the nuns, in their holy silence, scrubbed their dormitory floors and tended to the ill with cloths soaked in vinegar. You visited one once, an aunt, perhaps who kissed your cheek with hands that smelled faintly of urine and herbs. You flinched, she smiled, and you remember thinking, even then, that she deserved more than prayer. The tavern women have it worse. They tend to drunks who soil themselves in corners. They empty buckets while fending off wandering hands. One told you she keeps her hair covered not for modesty, but because she once had to clean vomit from it using ale. Another joked that she'd rather shovel dung than serve wine, it pays better, and the dung talks less. You laughed then. Now you think she wasn't joking. You try to imagine what it must be like, living a life of waste management with no reward, no recognition, just the endless cycle of filth and cleaning, like Sisyphus with a mop. You try to imagine what it must feel like to be told your worth lies in how clean the chamber pot is, and then, when it's finally clean, to be told nothing at all. You wonder, sometimes, if the women dream of leaving, not just the town, but the role, the task, the expectation, if they imagine a world where waste disappears with the pull of a handle, where no one has to carry anything warm and foul, where the worst part of the day doesn't involve lifting a lid and breathing deeply. You doubt it. Dreams are expensive here, and they don't last long. So the women do what they've always done. They rise before the sun, pour cold water into the basins, and scrub until their hands burn. They rinse, they dump, they sigh, and they keep the world turning, while everyone else pretends it turns on its own. You're sitting outside a bakery, half hungry, half tired, when someone mutters a story about the sewer ghost again. Not loud, no one says these things loudly, but it spreads all the same. A whisper shared between old women mending clothes. A joke half laughed by drunk men near the ditch. A tale that doesn't begin or end, but clings to the edges of the town's memory like moss on stone. The sewer ghost, they say, isn't one ghost, but many, or maybe one, made from many. A shape seen in the corner of the eye when the steam rises too thick. A noise in the night that sounds too much like footsteps sloshing through waste. You laugh, politely. You've heard it before. Everyone has. But tonight, for some reason, it sticks with you. The way your skin prickles when you pass the grates. The way your reflection in the sewage water sometimes moves just a moment too late. You shake it off, but not completely. Because every town like this has stories. Folklore flourishes in filth. Where there's rot, there's rumor. And this town, with its endless trenches and forgotten tunnels, is a breeding ground not just for rats and mold, but for stories. Children dare each other to run barefoot past the oldest sewer opening, the one with the iron bars bent like fingers. They say a man disappeared there once, just walked too close and slipped, or was pulled. No one knows. The baker swears he saw a pale face looking up from the water one dawn. His wife says it was just a trick of light, but she doesn't go near that street anymore. You've never seen anything yourself, but you've heard things. And sometimes, in the thick stillness between midnight and sunrise, when the town holds its breath, you hear them again. Historians still argue whether medieval urban legends held real power over public behavior, or were simply invented distractions from daily misery. You don't need the debate. You've seen the way people cross themselves near empty gutters, the way they speed up walking past the abandoned latrine shed behind the butcher's shop. There's a reason no one lives in the house at the corner of Dunwell Street. It's not cursed, exactly, but it smells wrong. Not stronger, not fouler, just wrong. Like something's trying too hard to seem normal. You avoid it. Everyone does. Even the rats seem hesitant. You remember when you were young, listening to your grandmother tell the tale of the woman who fell into the privy pit and came back different? She'd been down there 3 days, trapped, eating insects and drinking from the runoff. When they pulled her out, she didn't speak for a month. And when she did, she only whispered the names of people who would die. She was right, 2 more often than not. Eventually, they stopped listening. Then they stopped feeding her. She disappeared soon after. The story changes every time you hear it. But the pit behind the weaver's house is still boarded up. No one's reopened it. Another tale says that if you hear 3 splashes in succession after midnight, don't go looking. Don't check the trench. Don't open the trap door. Just wait. The water will quiet on its own, or it won't. Either way, don't interfere. You once asked the blacksmith where that story came from. He just shrugged and said, "Some noises ain't for you." You think about that sometimes when a pot tips on its own, or when the wind from the gutter smells unfamiliar. Not just foul, but strange. It's not just ghosts. The town has its share of stranger things. Stories of creatures that live below. Eyes like oil lamps. Teeth like chipped porcelain. One old man insists he saw hands child-sized but clawed reaching up from the muck behind the granary. No one believed him, but the granary workers still sweep salt near the drain every week, just in case. You think most of it's nonsense? But then again, you've seen maggots grow where nothing lived, and mushrooms sprout in perfect rings around sewer cracks. You've heard pipes grown with voices that echo too much like breath. You've seen things move beneath the water without a single ripple. And the songs, that's what unsettles you most. Sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and even the rats seem to sleep, a song drifts up from somewhere below, low, wordless, almost like humming. You've asked around, others have heard it too. A slow, droning sound that doesn't seem to come from any direction, but just exists. Some say it's the wind through the tunnels. Others say it's the town remembering itself. You stop trying to explain it. You just listen now, and hope it stays far away. There's a belief half serious, half desperate that the waste itself remembers, that every bucket poured, every pot emptied, every confession flushed away is kept somewhere beneath, in the darkness, growing into something that watches. You once joked that the sewer is a god, a wet, reeking deity of rot. The people at the table didn't laugh. One of them crossed himself. Another knocked on the wood and spat. You haven't made that joke since. You think of the things that go missing. Not just chamber pots and rags, but cats, boots, a whole wheelbarrow once. They say the ground took it. Or maybe the tunnels below. The ones no one dares to map. The ones older than the town itself. You once saw a man lower a lantern down one of the oldest drains just a dare. Nothing more. He dropped the rope, then the light, then his smile. Said he heard something breathe. You believed him. And yet, life goes on. People still empty their pots, still wash their hands at the well, still nod to the grates like they're part of the landscape. But the stories never die. They adapt. They mutate, like the waste itself. You've heard new versions now, a boy who vanished after mocking the gutter, a voice that calls your name if you linger too long in the bathhouse, a pale hand rising from the privy pit when the moon is full. You laugh, but you don't go near the bathhouse at night. Some say the stories exist to keep you cautious. Others say they're symptoms of living too close to decay. You think it's both, because when you live your life with the waste beneath your floorboards, when you breathe in things that should be buried, your mind starts to twist. It grows shadows. It hears echoes. It invents reasons for the smell. It needs to, because otherwise, you'd have to accept the truth that the horror isn't beneath you. It is you. It's your pot, your dump, your forgotten cloth. You created the stink. You fed the ghost. You are what seeps. So, you nod when the stories are told. You keep a sprig of rosemary above your bed. You whisper thank you to the gutter when it carries away your night's shame. And you pray not to a god of light, but to whatever rules the dark tunnels under your town, that your name isn't the next one whispered through the pipes. You never stop thinking about your boots. Not their color or fit or style. None of that matters here. You think about their thickness, the seams, how well they hold out moisture. You think about them the way a sailor thinks about his ropes, or a knight thinks about his sword. Because in this town, with its muddy alleys and leaking gutters and waste-soaked stones, your boots are the only thing keeping you from full contact with the past week's filth. And not metaphorical filth, either actual, sloshing, human filth. There's a reason everyone walks carefully. You don't stride here. You step. You test. You choose your path like a man navigating a minefield of wet regrets. And even then, it gets you. You feel it through the sole when the mud's too soft. You smell it when it splashes against your ankle. You spend the next hour pretending it was just water. It never is. There's a certain lie everyone tells themselves when they walk outside, that the street has dried, that the ditch is low today, that the gutters haven't overflowed since the last rain. But one look at your boots when you return home tells the truth. Brown smears, a clump of straw sticking to the heel, the faint stink that climbs your leg like ivy. You don't even try to clean them right away anymore. What's the point? The moment you step out again, they'll be baptized anew. You used to wear nice leather ones, polished, tight, fashionable. They didn't last a week. Now you wear the thickest things you can find, patched 3 times over, with soles made of layered hide and desperation. They still fail. Even the town streets seem to conspire against you. They're not paved in any modern sense, just uneven stones jammed together like bad teeth, slick with waste, moss, or whatever the wind drags in from the open latrines. There's a corner near the mill where the slope dips just enough to collect runoff. You've stepped there once in the dark. Once. The suction noise still haunts you. You left a boot behind and walked home wet-footed. One sock heavier than the other. Heart full of curses. That boot resurfaced days later near the market. No one asked how it got there. No one returned it. The worst part is that no one reacts anymore. The stink is part of the town. You could track mud, real, raw. Brown sludge into a shop and the merchant wouldn't blink. He'd just nudge a cloth with his foot and keep counting coins. Kids run barefoot through the muck, their soles blackened and shiny. You used to flinch at the sight. Now you just envy their immunity. You've seen men eat meat pies while standing ankle-deep in refuse. You've seen a woman give birth while the floor puddled beneath her. And always, the boots stay on. No one wants to know what happens if you take them off. Sometimes, the muck dries, becomes a crust, dust, even, and you start to forget. You walk faster. You laugh. You kick stones. And then the clouds return, and with them, the smell, the weight, the slow drag of your boot through a street that's become a soup of everything the town wanted to forget. And you remember again why no one whistles when it rains. Historians often overlook this detail. They write about markets and politics and plagues, but they never mention the boots, the endless, exhausting ritual of putting them on, scraping them off, repairing the seams, stuffing them with straw to dry. They forget that footwear is the first line of defense in a place where the very ground tries to rot you. You've seen men go barefoot after their soles gave out. You watch their feet crack, swell, turn purple. One man lost a toe. Another lost two. The apothecary said it was sewerfoot. Not a real name, but it fits. And then there are the clever ones, those who try to cheat the system. You've seen wooden clogs strapped over shoes. You've seen straw mats tied to feet with twine. One man wrapped his legs in waxed linen up to his thighs and declared himself invincible. He fell in the gutter 5 steps later. The linen held, yes, but he didn't. He wept, quietly, face down in the ditch, while others walked by pretending not to notice. No one offered help. You learn not to. After a while, it's not cruelty. It's survival. You once had a dream so vivid you almost believed it where the streets were dry, clean. You walked barefoot across smooth stone, and the wind smelled like nothing at all. No rot, no mildew, no hot breath of disease rising from cracks in the ground. Just silence. Clarity. You cried when you woke up, not loudly. Just a single tear that soaked into your pillow, as forgotten as your better boots. Even inside, the boots stay on. You don't trust the floors, not after the last rain. When the water seeped in under the door and brought the gutter with it, you stepped onto what you thought was dry straw and sank. The floorboards creaked wetly. Something moved beneath them. You didn't ask. You just backed away. Now, you keep your boots by your bed. Sometimes you sleep in them, just in case. There's an old superstition that if your boots fall over during the night, someone will die. You used to think it was nonsense. Now you're not so sure. Last week, you kicked yours by accident, knocked them both flat. The next morning, the butcher's boy was gone. No warning, no sickness, just gone. You stood by the ditch that day, one boot in the mud, and thought about propping them upright with stones. You still might. The blacksmith repairs soles for half price now. He used to charge more, but everyone needs him too often. His forge always smells like wet hide. His hands are blackened to the wrist. He once told you, in this town, the only things that never stop moving are rats and feet. You agreed. You still do. So every morning, you sit on your rickety stool, pull on your boots, stiff, stained, familiar, and prepare for another day of sidestepping puddles, leaping trench water, and trying not to think too hard about what squishes beneath you. You carry a stick now, not for walking, but for testing depth. You jab the ground before stepping. You poke at crusts to see if they hold. You nudge the gutter to check the flow. It helps, mostly. And when someone asks you why you walk the long way around, why you avoid certain alleys even when it rains, you don't explain. You just nod at their boots, at the fresh scuff, at the thin sole, at the smell they haven't noticed yet. And you think they'll learn. Everyone does, eventually. Because in a town like this, where the streets remember every step and the gutters whisper of things best left buried, your boots aren't just footwear. They're armor. They're memory. They're the last line between you and what waits beneath. And when they finally fail, and they always do, you pray you're close to home, or at least somewhere uphill. You don't expect conversation when you head toward the public latrine, but sometimes it happens anyway. The structure itself is barely a structure, more a leaning wall of wood and stone, offering minimal privacy and maximum exposure to the elements. Still, it's a fixture, a place people go, not just for necessity, but to talk, quietly, carefully, between grunts and sighs. You find yourself there now, perched on a damp plank above a pit that could swallow your boot if it slipped. Beside you, someone coughs. You nod, they nod, and just like that, you're both in it together, literally. There's a strange kind of camaraderie born from shared discomfort, from the mutual understanding that, yes, this smells awful, and yes, we're both trying to ignore the drips. The trick is not to think too much about what those drips are, or what's making the bubbling noise below. This is the part of town where social rules loosen, where status slips, and everyone merchant, farmer, widow, thief sits on the same plank. You've seen arguments settle here, whispered secrets traded between squatting strangers. One man once confessed to a theft mid-wipe. Another proposed marriage between plunks. There's a certain intimacy in this setting, though no one would admit it. No masks, no pretense, just people, perched in vulnerability. Their humanity made explicit. You glance over. The man beside you is the town scribe. You've seen him with ink-stained fingers and clean cuffs, quoting laws like incantations. Here, his sleeves are rolled, his brow damp, his knees creaking just like yours. You almost smile. The latrine itself is a marvel of mediocrity. A long trench, roofed in places, open elsewhere, with a few wooden dividers that offer the illusion of privacy. Beneath it runs a pit shallow in some spots, deeper in others, filled with a slurry that defies measurement. Some days it seems bottomless. Other days it rises too close to comfort. No one ever volunteers to clean it. That job rotates with dread. The boy assigned this week hasn't been seen since yesterday. You assume he's hiding. You don't blame him. The tools are simple: a long-handled scoop, a bucket, a rag tied around the face, the reward a few coins, some stale bread, and lifelong trauma. Still, the latrine stays busy. Everyone comes here eventually, early in the morning. It's the elderly, quiet and slow, leaning on sticks, muttering curses at their joints. Midday brings merchants and housewives, hurrying between errands, making quick work of a full pot. Evenings are worst. That's when the drinkers arrive, full of mead and boldness, laughing too loud, missing the hole, staining the boards. You once saw a man pass out on the bench. He didn't fall in, miraculously, but the flies wouldn't leave him for hours. Despite the filth, despite the smell that clings to your clothes long after you leave, there's something oddly democratic about this place. Here, no one pretends to be above anyone else. There's no point. Everyone stinks. Everyone squats. You've heard gossip traded like gold between plops and pauses. You've heard plans made, debts settled, even poems recited. One woman comes here to practice speeches. She claims it's the best acoustics in town. You once heard her deliver an entire monologue about taxes while adjusting her skirts. You clapped, quietly. She winked. Of course, not everyone handles the latrine with such grace. There are accidents, missteps. One poor lad lost his footing mid-squat and had to be fished out with a hooked pole. He was never the same. They burned his clothes and shaved his head, though no one thought lice were the issue. More than once, someone has dropped a ring, a pouch, even a loaf of bread into the pit. You don't ask whether they tried to retrieve it. Some stories are best left beneath the boards. Historians still argue whether shared latrines were signs of communal strength or architectural desperation. You think they're both. This setup forces people together bodily, socially, spiritually. There's no isolation here. No locked door between you and the next man's struggle. It's humbling. It's humiliating. It's human. And sometimes, in the right light, it's even funny. You remember one autumn morning when a goat wandered in and refused to leave, sat itself right on the edge and stared down anyone who came near. A priest tried to exorcise it. The goat sneezed on him. He hasn't returned. You try not to think about the pit, but it's always there beneath your feet, gurgling softly, reminding you that everything you eat, everything you are, ends up here. The stench has layers. It rises in waves, sweet, then sharp, earthy, then chemical. It clings to your hair, seeps into your fingernails, lives in your nostrils long after you've left. And yet, you return, because there's nowhere else. Your chamber pot is full. The alley behind your home has been claimed by a neighbor with bad aim. The river is too far, and so you sit, you breathe through your mouth, you wait. You've learned tricks over the years. A sprig of mint tucked under your nose, a damp cloth wrapped around your face, some chew cloves. Others hum. One man swears by holding a candle, while squatting says it burns the stink from the air. You tried it once. The candle fell. The flame didn't help. You lost an eyebrow. Never again. And when it's over, when you've done your business and tossed in a handful of dry dirt, you stand, stretch, and nod to whoever's next. Sometimes there's a line. Sometimes there's a moment of silence, like a chapel between services where no one speaks, and everyone just breathes, or tries to. You take your leave with a quiet step, careful not to slip. Once outside, the air seems cleaner even if it isn't. You squint into the sunlight. It's the same town, same gutter, same rats and rumors, but for a moment, it feels lighter. You survived, again. You navigated the planks, dodged the worst of the splashes, kept your dignity mostly intact, and you walk away with a new piece of gossip, or a joke overheard, or a strange phrase muttered by a stranger that won't leave your mind. Because here, in the town latrine, you don't just relieve yourself, you shed a little pride. You pick up a little truth. You leave behind more than waste. You leave behind a piece of the day, floating somewhere in the pit below. Joining the quiet chorus of those who came before, you pass by the tanner's shop, and it hits you not just the smell, but the memory of every bad idea mankind ever had about waste. It's not just that the stench is strong, it's that it clings. It walks with you, and if you linger too long, it becomes you. The tanner waves from the shadows, elbow deep in something dark and viscous, his apron stiff with crusted remnants of days past. You nod politely, pretending not to gag. What he's working with, what he's always working with, is something people whisper about but never say aloud. Human waste. More specifically, urine. Collected in jars, pails, and sometimes even communal pots. Sold by the bucketful. Poured over animal hides as part of a cleansing ritual so foul it could empty a tavern. They call it lant. Sounds almost quaint, doesn't it? But it's ammonia-rich, eye-watering, and one of the most essential ingredients in preparing leather, which means the soft boots on your feet, the gloves on your hands, the saddles, the pouches, all of them were once steeped in piss, literally. And that's not even the strangest use for it. You've heard of barbers using aged urine as a hair dye, apothecaries mixing it with ash to treat infections. One midwife swore by a poultice made of sheep dung and fermented human waste for bringing down fevers. You didn't believe her until you saw her apply it to a noble's forehead. He survived. The smell lingered for a week. Historians still debate whether these methods worked or were just acts of desperation wrapped in ritual. You don't debate. You've seen too much. Waste wasn't just discarded in the medieval world, it was recycled, revered, repurposed with grim efficiency, alchemy of the most disturbing sort. And yet, despite the smell, the danger, the obvious insanity of it, people clung to these practices. Part of it was necessity. When resources are scarce, you use everything. Every scrap of cloth, every shard of bone, every bodily byproduct. But part of it, if you're being honest, is belief. The sense that within filth lies power. That the very things we try to cast off are the ones that might hold the secret to healing, to wealth, to understanding. You once watched a woman smear cow dung across her doorway during a fever outbreak. Not as a repellent, but as protection. She claimed it warded off evil. You didn't laugh. You just walked faster. There were others. Stranger things. Recipes passed in whispers. Potions brewed in cellars. One involved mixing ashes of burned hair with morning urine and applying it to warts. Another called for goat dung, crushed beetles, and pig's blood to be smeared on the soles of the feet to draw illness downward. A traveling alchemist once sold gold water for a hefty price bottled pea aged in clay jars and allegedly infused with divine light. He made a fortune, then vanished. Some say the townspeople found out what they were drinking. Others say the formula worked, and he ascended. You're betting on the first. But perhaps the most unsettling thing you've seen was the scholar. He lived near the river, collected every kind of waste animal, human, you name it, and kept it in labeled jars. Claimed he was studying the transformative properties of decay. His hut reeked so badly the grass around it turned yellow. Still, people visited, not many, but enough. He swore he'd discovered a substance in the sludge that could transmute illness into strength. You once peeked through his window and saw him sipping something thick and gray. He never got sick. True, but he never slept either, and his eyes didn't blink. Eventually, his hut burned down. No one asked why. No one mourned. All of this adds up to a paradox that never leaves you, that in the dirtiest corners of life, people search for purity. In filth, they seek cure. In rot, they seek rebirth. It's poetic if you squint, horrifying if you don't. You've seen waste used to tan leather, dye wool, treat wounds, kill pests, and even flavor food accidentally. You hope. There's a cheese made in a village upriver, aged in goat dung. They swear by it. You tried it once. Your tongue still hasn't forgiven you. And then there are the charlatans, the ones who know better, but peddle hope in bottles anyway. You watched one stir a pot of urine, wine, and crushed lilies, claiming it could ward off plague. He sold vials for 2 copper apiece. People lined up. One woman bought 10. She died 2 days later. He moved on to the next village, unbothered. You stayed behind, bearing your nose in a vinegar cloth and wondering why the scent of lilies now made you nervous. Even the town's sanitation workers, the gong farmers, the latrine boys, the trench rakers have learned strange techniques. One swears that pouring stale ale into a pit tames the smell. Another insists that feeding rats leftover fish bones keeps them from gnawing on boots. They whisper about worms that thrive in waste, whose presence predicts the weather. You once saw a farmer use manure to trace symbols in his field before planting. Said it told the soil where to grow. That year, his harvest doubled. Coincidence maybe, or maybe the filth knows more than we admit. There's a deeper truth to all of it, a grim kind of wisdom, that nothing is ever just waste. Not here, not in this world. Everything serves, everything cycles, even what we flush away, especially what we flush away. The very things we label as disgusting, the stink, the sludge, the runoff, those are the materials of medieval life. They shape the boots you wear, the tools you hold, the food you grow, the remedies you risk. Every layer of society is greased, quite literally, by the unmentionable. It's not beautiful. It's not even tragic. It's just real. You sit now with a pot of stew in your lap, and you think about where the leather bowl came from. You think about the dung that fertilized the carrots, the sheep manure that made the broth richer, the smoke from dried cow patties that cooked it all. You raise the spoon to your mouth. It tastes fine. You eat anyway. Because in this world, you don't get to choose cleanliness. You just get to choose what you accept. And eventually, you accept everything. The stink, the stains, the quiet horror that the air you breathe has passed through 100 privies before reaching your lungs. You stop fighting. You begin to see the logic. You nod when someone says the waste has value. You agree when someone says the dung is sacred. You pretend it's wisdom. Maybe it is. Maybe it always was. So when the next peddler arrives with bottles of yellow miracle tonic, you don't laugh. You buy one. You sip it. You try not to taste it. You pray it works. And when someone asks what's in it, you say, alchemy. You don't say what you know, that everything in this town is built on waste, on the idea that if you believe hard enough, even filth can save you. You wake to the smell again, not sharp like fire or rotting meat, but soft and constant, like wet wool left too long in a cellar. It's not that the town has begun to stink. The town always stinks. It's that your nose no longer defends you. What once triggered gagging now elicits only a dull recognition. You've adapted. You hate that, because it means the filth has won. It lives in your hair, your clothes, the corners of your home where the wind forgets to visit. You notice it in your fingernails even after scrubbing, in your food when you eat too quickly to notice the taste, in your dreams when the air turns thick and the water runs brown. The stink doesn't strike anymore. It whispers, it reminds, and worst of all, it lingers. You leave your house and instantly feel it on your skin, the invisible film of odor that clings to the entire town like a second atmosphere. And you know, just by how it lays heavier in the air, that the smell has deepened today. You pass the baker and see him scattering sage leaves near the doorway, not for flavor, but for self-defense. You walk past the school and catch a whiff of lye and boiled cloth. The children cough as they chant their lessons. You wave to a friend. He doesn't wave back. His face is turned, grimacing toward the ground. It's worse today. Everyone knows it. No one speaks of it. There's a concept the town understands intuitively, though no one names it the smellscape, a map of odors. Each street has a signature. By scent alone, you can trace your route. The tannery hits you first, acrid and sour. Then comes the fishmonger's runoff, oily, with a touch of salt. The butcher's alley, thick with blood and old straw. And then the sewage, creeping from the ground with a slow persistence that makes you wonder if the earth itself is turning inside out. You've learned to walk with your mouth closed. You've mastered shallow breathing. But it's not enough. You carry a cloth soaked in rosemary oil. Hold it to your face when the wind shifts. Others use onions, or garlic, or wet moss, whatever dulls the sense, but none of it truly works. The smell gets in. Eventually, it always gets in. It's everywhere in the walls of the church, in the pews, in the folds of the priest's robe. You once sat through an entire sermon trying not to gag every time he lifted his arms. Even incense fails. You've watched it spiral upward, mixing with the stink instead of masking it. The congregation pretends it's holy, but you can see the grimaces, the lowered eyes. One woman fainted last week during a funeral. They said it was grief. You know it was the combination of the mourning and mildew, and there's no escaping it, not even in moments of joy. During the harvest festival, when dancers fill the square and sweet cider flows, the smell still hangs in the corners. Underneath the scent of apples and firewood, it waits. You once kissed someone beneath the lanterns and caught a whiff of trench mud on her neck. You didn't mention it. She didn't notice, but it stayed with you. That memory, that mixture of sweetness and squalor, defines the town more than any flag or hymn. Historians still argue whether medieval towns were truly as foul as accounts suggest, or if later writers exaggerated for drama. You don't argue. You live it. The air tells the truth. It tells you what died last week. It tells you where the floodwater sat longest. It tells you when the night soil pit at the edge of town has begun to crack. You once met a traveler who said he could smell the town from 2 miles away. You believed him. You've lived here for years. And some days, even you can't tell where the town ends and the stench begins. There was an attempt to fix it. A priest convinced the council to try perfumed barrels of rosewater dumped in the ditches every morning. It worked. For about 20 minutes. Then the heat returned, and the result was worse than before. The mixture of decay and floral sweetness made people nauseous. They abandoned the idea, but the priest kept dabbing his robes with the scent for months. He said it made him feel cleaner. No one had the heart to tell him otherwise. You've adapted your home as best you can. Herbs in every window, bowls of vinegar under the bed, rags soaked in strong wine nailed to the corners of the ceiling. It helps. Until it rains. Then the walls weep, the floorboards swell, the basement begins to cough. You've tried sealing the cracks with wax and prayer. You've tried sleeping outside. You always come back, because outside is worse. You remember one summer when the smell got so bad. A group of men tried to dig a trench around the marketplace, hoping to divert runoff. They struck an old pit instead abandoned, but far from empty. What came out was thick and slow, like the town itself was bleeding. They called it the summer of the black water. That summer, you lost your appetite. You lost a friend. You lost any illusion that smell wasn't a form of violence. Some say you can build a tolerance, that the longer you stay, the less you notice. That's true, in part, but it's not the same as immunity. It's resignation. It's your body giving up. You stop gagging, not because the smell is gone, but because your senses have surrendered. You start to find comfort in the familiar notes, like recognizing the scent of your own sweat. You even begin to identify days by smell, the meaty day, the vinegar wind, the soft wrought afternoon. Language evolves. You stop saying good morning. You start saying mild today, isn't it? There's a strange poetry in it. If you're desperate enough to find it, a kind of shared rhythm. When someone walks by with a clean scent, everyone turns. You remember the time a stranger passed through town, smelling faintly of pine? People followed her, silently, for 3 blocks. She left that same night. No one blamed her. The innkeeper said her room smelled wrong for days, too clean, too sharp. The next guest refused to sleep there. They preferred the usual musk. You've learned that smell is memory. That scent, more than sight or sound, holds the power to bring the past forward. A whiff of spoiled grain, and you're back in the granary collapse. A sniff of burning lard, and you remember the bakery fire. Even joy is scented your mother's stew, your first cider, the warm hay of a borrowed barn. But here, in this town, the primary memory is always the same. The baseline, the stink. You carry it even when you leave. People know where you're from. They wrinkle their noses when you speak. You've stopped trying to hide it. Because the truth is, you're part of it now. The smell, the town, the weight of years trapped in stone and soil and air. You're not above it. You're not outside it. You are soaked in it. You breathe it. You eat it. You sweat it. And one day, when you die, you'll add to it. One more layer. One more note in the long, unbroken symphony of rot that is home. You find yourself standing before the magistrate's house, not because you need anything from him, but because of the dripping noise. It's subtle at first, lost beneath the market chatter and the clang of a distant blacksmith. But as you listen, you start to hear it more clearly, a slow, rhythmic pat, pat, pat. From the side of the building, you follow the sound and discover it a leak, dark and steady, seeping from beneath a stone wall and trickling into the gutter like a confession. It's not rain. The sky is clear, and this part of town sits too high for natural flooding. You know what it is before you even lean close. Someone's latrine pipe is cracked. Again. You step back quickly, pulling your cloak tighter, and look up at the shuttered windows. No one's home, or no one's admitting they are. The leak continues. The town watches, but doesn't speak. Because what would they say? It's not the first time. It won't be the last. The rules are clear. If your waste leaks into the street, you fix it. But rules only matter when someone enforces them, and here, enforcement depends on who you are. Waste is supposed to stay hidden. That's the unspoken contract. You can live in filth, breathe it, sleep beside it, but you must keep it discreet. The second it leaks into public view, the illusion breaks, and with it comes embarrassment, anger, blame. It becomes a legal issue, and in medieval towns, that's a whole different kind of stink. The town charters are filled with regulations on sewage, no dumping chamber pots before sunrise, no emptying waste into shared wells, no allowing privy runoff into market paths. Fines are listed, punishments recorded, but these laws read more like wishful thinking than practiced reality. You've watched vendors shout over piles of dung while town officials look the other way. You've seen fines waived because a man knew someone who knew someone else. And you've seen poor families punished with stocks and shame for a single tip bucket. There's a case you remembered 2 winters ago. A midwife living near the edge of town had a broken latrine wall. It had collapsed during a freeze, and the runoff trickled onto the main path. She couldn't afford repairs. She posted warnings, laid planks, tried everything she could. Still, a merchant's apprentice slipped in the muck, broke his leg, and screamed loud enough to wake half the district. By noon, the midwife was standing before the magistrate, red-faced and shaking, while the boy's family demanded payment, apology, and punishment. She was fined a sum she couldn't pay. Her privy was boarded up. Within days, she was gone. Her home sat empty for months. People walked wide around it, not because of the stink it had long since dried, but because of what it represented. The truth leaking out. You think of the irony, that the same officials who punish leaks often live with worse beneath their own floors. You've seen the inside of their homes, smelled the air. They have cesspits like everyone else, but with longer delays between cleanings. Some even build false walls to disguise the scent. One noble's dining room was once built directly above an ancient latrine chamber. The floor sagged, the chairs listed, and yet dinners continued, perfume heavy in the air, candles masking the inevitable. When the floor finally collapsed during a feast, it took 3 guests and a roast boar with it. No one was injured, but no one stayed to finish dessert, either. Historians still discuss these accidents with a tone of dry amusement, noting the comedic elements of sanitation failure, but you know better. There's nothing comedic about the sound a person makes when they fall into something that should never have seen daylight. There's nothing funny about the silence that follows. You were there once helping to dig out a man who had tripped and vanished into a trench hidden by snow. By the time you reached him, his mouth was open. You don't know if he'd screamed, You don't want to know. The trench has been boarded since. No one asks about it. Still, these accidents shape the way people live. Entire streets shift habits based on a single leak. A broken pipe leads to new paths, new superstitions. You step over that stone, not because it's loose, but because it once hit a pool of waste that stained a man's boots so deeply he had to burn them. You avoid that alley not because it's narrow, but because a family once dumped their pot from the second story during the solstice festival, hitting a priest in the chest. The stain took days to fade. The memory hasn't. You once tried to report a leak yourself, behind the apothecary's shop, where the ditch had stopped draining and started bubbling instead. You went to the clerk's office, waited your turn, filled out a parchment with shaky handwriting. The clerk barely glanced at it, said he'd look into it. Nothing changed. 2 days later, a child slipped, cracked his head, and the town mourned for a week. The ditch was finally cleared. You wondered if your report had mattered at all, or if it was just coincidence, just bureaucracy waiting for tragedy. The problem is systemic. The waste is never truly gone. It doesn't disappear. It moves, slowly, silently, seeping into new cracks, rising in unexpected corners. You can dig pits, build grates, post fines, but the ground remembers. You once saw a cellar flood with old runoff. Despite being dry for decades, the air turned thick, the walls bled brown, and the family who lived there moved out without a word. No one has rented it since. Not even rats go near. You hear rumors of a man who maps the town's leaks. Not the official sewer lines, but the real ones, the failures, the accidents, the places where things rise when they shouldn't. He works alone, marking doors with chalk, carrying a ledger bound in oilskin. Some say he used to be a clerk. Others say he lost someone in the muck. You've never met him, but you've seen the chalk, small circles drawn low, where the eye might miss them. You once asked what they meant. A girl told you. That's where not to stand during rain. You believe her, and so you walk carefully. You learn the town's new rhythms, how a blocked trench on one end means an overflow on the other, how a newly repaired wall often signals a hidden breach nearby. You understand that managing waste isn't about control, it's about surrender, about learning to live with the knowledge that, at any moment, the ground beneath you might open, and everything you hope was hidden will pour out for all to see. You look back at the magistrate's house. The leak is still there, slower now, maybe, or maybe just resigned. A fly buzzes near the trickle. You wonder if anyone will fix it. You wonder if anyone will notice when the smell gets worse, or if it already has. You adjust your path, step wide, and keep walking. Because here, in this town, you learn to live with the leak. You reach the castle gates on a delivery errand and pause not out of awe or fear, but caution, because you know what waits inside those walls, and it isn't grandeur. It's rats, not the kind that scamper and vanish, but the kind that stare back, the kind that move with purpose, the kind that know exactly where the waste piles up, where the old pipes creak, where the servants fear to go. This is not your first time here. You've watched the noblemen pace the halls with clean boots and turned noses, oblivious or pretending to be to what lives beneath their feet, but the rats know. They always know. And the closer you get to the castle kitchens, the more obvious it becomes. Droppings in corners, gnawed wood along baseboards, a greasy smudge along the wall where a dozen tails have brushed past. You see it all because you look. No one else dares. The kitchen boys say the rats come from the outer trench, that they crawl through the cracks in the old walls and scurry across the cold flagstones like messengers from the sewer. You've seen one thick as your arm, eyes like polished stones vanish into a hole behind the spice cupboard. No one followed it. No one wanted to know where it went, and no one mentioned it again. It's easier that way. The castle has 1,000 walls, 100 rooms, and more secrets than anyone wants to count. The rats are just one more. And yet, unlike ghosts or curses or whispers in the dark, the rats leave tracks. They make noise. They chew through evidence. You deliver your package, some smoked fish, and a sack of onions, and the steward doesn't even glance at you. He's watching the floor. You follow his gaze and see movement, a flick of a tail near the pantry door. He says nothing, just signs your slip and waves you off. but you see the fear in his shoulders. Because here's the thing, no one wants to say aloud. The rats don't just live here. They thrive. They breed. They feed. Not on scraps or crusts, but on things no one wants to think about. You've heard the stories. The maid who vanished. The cook who found a bone where no one had been buried. The scratching behind the walls that doesn't stop, even when you bang back. Historians still debate whether the infamous rat year at Highgate Keep was fact or exaggeration, an event where vermin overtook the lower levels of a castle and forced a partial evacuation. You've read about it in dusty records, but you've also spoken to a guard who served there. He said they burned the cellar, but the rats returned, that some could open latches, that one bit a horse's leg clean through. You didn't ask more. His eyes said enough. Back outside, you circle to the servants' entrance, where the refuse is dumped. A low wall surrounds a sunken pit, now half covered in straw and rags. This is where the castle hides what it doesn't want to carry through the halls. Broken chamber pots, rotten vegetables, bones, human waste. Sometimes it's burned. Sometimes it's left to rot. Always. It attracts attention. You hear the chittering before you see them. Dozens. Maybe more. They move like water, smooth and unbothered. One looks at you, actually looks, and you step back. You feel ridiculous. You're the human. You're supposed to rule this place. But the rat doesn't flinch. You talk to a scullery maid while she peels tubers. She tells you the rat stole a ladle last week, dragged it down the hallway. A joke, maybe, or maybe not. Another says the rats grow bold after dark, when the fires die and the watchmen nod off, that they climb beds, that they nibble fingers, that they stare and wait and remember. You laugh politely, but you feel it, the wrongness, the knowledge that the castle might belong more to them than to the lord in his feathered hat. And they come from the pipes. That much is clear. Every drain is a gateway. Every latrine chute is a tunnel. You looked down one once, just once, and saw movement. Not fast, like panic, but slow. Intentional. The way a creature moves when it doesn't fear what's above. You step back quickly, as if the pipe might inhale you, and you never looked again. You know they eat more than food. You've seen the cloth chewed from sleeves, the leather thinned where they gnawed too long, the bite marks on a stable doorframe, deep and perfect. You once found a pile of teeth human, probably in a heap behind the grain sacks. The steward said nothing, just shoveled them into a sack and kept sweeping. You never asked whose they were. Sometimes, when you visit, you notice fewer servants. A cook missing, a new stable hand with a limp, a new scullery girl who doesn't speak. You wonder where the old ones went. You wonder how many left and how many simply stopped showing up. The castle doesn't keep great records. People disappear in places like this, and the rats never talk. You once asked a priest why the rats seem to flourish here. He said they're drawn to places where nothing is clean, not just physically, but morally. That filth calls to filth. You nodded, unsure if you believed him, but you remembered it when you passed a rat dragging a chunk of raw meat across a tapestry of St. George. The tapestry was torn. The meat left a smear. No one cleaned it. The castle guards claim they've killed dozens. They set traps. They bring in cats. Nothing works. The rats don't fight like animals. They don't scatter. They watch. They wait. And when you let your guard down, they take, they chew, they gnaw. They come back. There's a rumor that in one wing of the castle, now sealed the rats won. That no one enters. That even the walls hiss if you press your ear to them. You've never been. You never will. So you finish your delivery and leave quickly. Boots clicking against the stone with more purpose than dignity. You don't look back. You don't linger. You don't speak to anyone on the way out. Because the castle is beautiful. From a distance, its towers, its banners, its proud stonework. But up close, you see it for what it is: a hive, a shell, a monument to rot covered in velvet and perfume. And beneath it all, the rats move like kings. You've passed by the mason's yard dozens of times, but today you stop not because the stones are any different, but because you've begun to see them for what they are, not just walls or steps or towers, but monuments to failure. Because no matter how high you build, no matter how well you cut or mortar or fit, nothing keeps the waste out forever. That's the quiet truth beneath every beautiful street and every proud facade in town. Architecture, you've come to learn, is not a shield, it's a sieve, a well-dressed illusion. You lean against the side of a chapel and feel the dampness bleeding through. You look down and see the telltale trace of green-black mold curling up from the base like a shadow climbing back into memory. It hasn't rained in a week. This isn't water. This is seepage. This is what lies behind the stone. This is what refuses to stay buried. The masons themselves don't speak of it. They keep chiseling, keep stacking, keep slapping lime into cracks. But you've watched their eyes. You've seen the way they hesitate when laying stones over old sewer lines, how they pause before sealing an arch above a gutter mouth. There's something in their movements, a reverent caution, not respect, not fear, just weariness. Because they know what you now understand, the filth always returns. The best you can do is redirect it, temporarily. You remember when the east wall of the granary collapsed? Heavy rain, they said. Poor drainage. But those who lived nearby whispered a different story, that the wall had been built over a network of old latrine tunnels, forgotten and rotting, hollowed out by centuries of drip and flow and pressure. When the weight became too much, the wall gave way. No one was crushed, but the grain was ruined. The rats feasted for weeks. The smell was worse than anything you'd imagined. A fermented blend of mold, mildew, and long-decayed things that should never have seen light again. It took 6 men to clear it. One never returned. Another lost his sense of smell. He called it a blessing. Historians still argue whether medieval urban planning was reactive or strategic. You'd laugh if it didn't sting. Planning is generous. This town was built the way moss grows on stone wherever space allowed. Homes stacked atop shops. Shops leaned against temples. Everything shifting over time until the ground forgot its shape. And beneath it all, layers. Not just of history, but of sewage. Waste from generations ago. Pressed into the soil like old parchment beneath fresh ink. The pipes, when they exist, are cracked clay and hollow logs. The channels are guesswork. The grates are afterthoughts. The idea of a system is more metaphor than method. You once tried to follow one of the drainage paths, just to understand how it worked. It started behind the tannery, wound through 2 courtyards, slipped under a bakery, then vanished beneath a garden wall. You found it again near the church, but only after crawling through a space barely wider than your chest, ankle-deep in water that smelled of despair. And when you found where it ended, a broken trough near the riverbank, you realized nothing had truly ended. The flow simply disappeared into the ground, uncontained, unacknowledged, like everything else. You start to notice the signs: a soft patch in a stone floor, a warped beam in an otherwise straight wall, cracks along the edge of a foundation, always blamed on frost or time. But you know better. You've seen waste burrow like roots. You've seen it rot from below. The masons may patch and plaster and polish, but they're fighting a tide with bare hands. You once helped carry stone to a new latrine enclosure. It stood for 3 months. Then the soil beneath it gave way, swallowing it whole in a single night. No one rebuilt. They just moved the hole. There are places in town where the ground has become soft year-round, where no amount of fill or stone will hold. People avoid them instinctively. One courtyard has been paved 6 times. Each time, it cracks. Each time, someone falls. A boy broke his ankle last spring. A woman slipped last month. The council sent workers to level it again, but the workers left early, muttering, said the stones wouldn't sit right, said the ground had gone hollow. You know what they meant. You've stepped there too. You've felt the earth give just slightly, like a sigh. You talk to an older mason, one who's been building since before your mother's time. He sits with a pipe that never stays lit and tells you stories about stone that sweats, about walls that bleed. You laugh, but he doesn't. He tells you of an archway that wept brown water for 3 days before collapsing, of a crypt that flooded without rain, of a cellar that grew mushrooms shaped like hands. The filth doesn't stay where you put it, he says. It moves. It waits. It wants back in. You ask him what he means. He shakes his head. Everything we build, he says, is just a lid. And the worst part is he's right. Because no matter how clean the street looks after a sweep, no matter how smooth the wall after fresh plaster, you know what's underneath. You've seen it bubble up after storms. You've smelled it in basements. You've scraped it off the undersides of floorboards. Every structure in this town sits atop waste. It's the invisible foundation. You walk over it every day. And now, you've stopped pretending otherwise. There's a school near the square, built just a few years ago, meant to be a modern space, clean lines, proper drainage, good light. They dug deep for the foundation, and what they found made the workers vomit. A collapsed sewer trench, dozens of years old, filled with bones and boots and more than one stained cloak. No one knows how it got there. No one wants to. They buried it quickly and poured new stone, but the smell remains. The children cough, the walls dampen, the teacher keeps a bundle of rosemary near the door. You once asked her why. She said it keeps the past quiet. And still the town builds. Still the masons work. Because what else can you do? You patch, you reinforce, you pray the walls hold a little longer. You try to forget that beneath the chapel is a crypt, and beneath the crypt is a pit, and beneath the pit is something older, wetter, darker. You've learned to love stone not for its beauty, but for its denial, its refusal to acknowledge the mess beneath. You touch it sometimes, just to feel something solid, something that hasn't yet collapsed. But even stone has limits. You've seen walls bulge, floors rise, foundations crack with a sound like a throat clearing. And when they do, everyone pretends they didn't hear. They light candles, they burn sage, they sprinkle sand, they recite laws, but no one looks too closely, because they know, just like you do, that beneath every arch, every street, every smiling facade, the waste is waiting. You're walking home from the baker's when it happens, one foot in front of the other, mind drifting through half-formed thoughts, and then crack. It's not loud, not dramatic, but something shifts beneath your soul, subtle and soft, like the town just exhaled through its teeth. You freeze. You know that sound. Everyone does. You don't move for a moment, listening, hoping it's just a loose stone or a snapped root, but the ground beneath you feels different, looser, like something stirred. You step back slowly and see it, a small fissure opening between the cobblestones, oozing something that was once water, maybe, but now looks like broth boiled too long, thick, yellow-brown, bubbling faintly. You step back again. You don't scream. You just walk faster, because you know what's coming. You've seen it before. Sinkholes, that's what the town calls them, as if they're just sudden, natural collapses. But you know better. They're not holes. They're mouths. The town opens them when it's full, when it needs to spit something out, or swallow someone in. They appear overnight, sometimes in alleys, sometimes in courtyards, sometimes in places you thought were safe. You remember the first one you ever saw, barely 13, peering through a crowd near the chapel square. An old man had vanished while sweeping his step. One moment, he was humming. The next, the broom lay spinning beside a pit the size of a wine barrel. They never found him. The town filled the hole with rocks and dirt, but people still walked around that spot for years. You still do. Sinkholes don't just take people. They take memories. You once watched a family lose their entire pantry floor and all into a yawning crack that opened beneath their kitchen. Gone. Just like that. Pickled vegetables, clay jars, the salted pork that had been curing since spring. The father stood at the edge, staring down into the dark, and whispered, "It smells like my grandfather's boots." You understood. The smell of old things, buried long ago, returning uninvited. Historians might one day write about structural instability, about the erosion of subsoil by moisture and gas. But you live here. You know the truth. The town digests. It's not just the filth. It's the pressure. Years of waste layered beneath the surface chamber pot runoff. Slaughterhouse drainage, rotted wood, failed repairs, forgotten tunnels. All of it festering, compressing. building a kind of subterranean resentment. And then, suddenly, it gives. A floorboard bends, a stone slips, a cellar groans, and the ground gives way. You've seen a cow vanish up to its shoulders in one. You've seen chickens refuse to walk over certain spots. Animals know, they always do. There's a joke people make when a new hole opens. Looks like the town's hungry again. You don't laugh anymore. Not after what happened to Mira. She'd been sweeping her stoop, humming just like that old man years before. The same exact spot. Some say, one moment upright, the next a shriek, then silence. The hole was small, barely wider than a barrel, but it stank like old blood and warm vinegar. They tried to dig, but the mud kept sliding back in. Eventually, they just boarded it up, put a flower pot on top. Now, people leave coins there, like it's a grave. Maybe it is. You begin to walk differently, more cautious. You test the ground with your toes before committing your weight. You memorize the dry spots, the firm stones, the safe routes. You notice others doing the same. It becomes a kind of dance, an unspoken choreography. Everyone stepping lightly, sidestepping cracks, avoiding the sunken spots that weren't there last week. The town becomes a map of silent warnings. And then there are the dreams, the ones you don't talk about, where you're falling not fast, not violently, just slowly, helplessly, into something warm and breathing, where the earth closes over your head like a lid, where you can't scream because your mouth is already full of soil. You wake in sweat, your legs kicking at blankets, trying to climb back up to a surface that no longer feels stable. You lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering what part of your house will give first. The hallway, the corner by the stove, maybe under your bed. You check sometimes, just to be sure. You once heard a theory half-joked, half-believed that the town is alive, that it's a creature, slow and massive, that feeds on its own waste, that the streets are veins, that the sinkholes are its way of breathing. You don't believe it. Not really. But on days like this, when the wind carries that sour-sweet stink from the cracks, you wonder, because there's no pattern to the collapses, no logic. Rich houses, poor shacks, chapels, stables all fall the same. The town doesn't discriminate, it just chooses, and when it does, the aftermath is always the same. A crowd forms, people whisper, someone throws in a torch, the light flickers, catches on wet walls, disappears into black. Someone suggests filling it with stone. Someone else says, leave it open, let it vent. Eventually, a decision is made. Boards are laid, ropes strung, but no one truly forgets. The hole is still there, even when covered. It waits. You wonder how many lie beneath the surface now, half covered, half collapsed, hidden beneath market stalls and chapel floors. You once dropped a coin in one by mistake and never heard it land. You think about that sometimes, how far it might have fallen, whether it landed in a pool of old runoff, whether it rests now beside a broken bowl or a rib bone. The builders try to stay ahead of it. They patch and brace and lay new foundations, but the materials are tired. The budget's thin. You've seen them mix mortar with water drawn from the same ditch that leaks during storms. You've seen wooden supports splinter as they're hammered in. One foreman even joked that if you build fast enough, the ground doesn't notice. He said that 2 days before his tool shed collapsed into the soil behind him. The town pretends otherwise. The council issues statements. They say the ground is sound. They say everything is under control. But people aren't fooled. They sleep with boots beside the bed. They keep ropes near windows. They dig shallow privies and empty them often, because everyone knows that what lies beneath is waiting. Not malicious, not sentient, just inevitable. And you learn to live with it, to step gently, to move quickly over suspect ground, to nod solemnly when someone says, "Did you hear another one opened?" You know the rituals. You bring the board. You hammer the nails. You light a candle and place it near the edge. You say nothing, because what is there to say? The earth cracked. The town took. That's how it's always been. And you pray not to be spared, but to be taken clean, not buried half alive, not swallowed slow, just quick and quiet, with no one watching. That's the best you can hope for. In a town like this, where waste seeps into everything and the ground never forgets, dignity doesn't come from survival. It comes from vanishing without a scream. You sit beside the ditch one last time, not because you want to, but because you've grown tired of pretending you're not part of it. The town creaks around you, soft footfalls, distant coughs, the hiss of something boiling over in a nearby kitchen, and the ditch gurgles its reply. It's not loud, not dramatic, just that constant, wet whisper of flow. Not water, not anymore. You know what it carries. You've followed its path, smelled its contents, watched it shift color with the seasons. In the winter, it hardens. In the spring, it overflows. In the summer, it simmers. Autumn is the worst, thick and slow and desperate. Like the town is trying to exhale everything it couldn't stomach. You breathe it in anyway. You always have. It's in your lungs now. In your hair. It's under your fingernails, even when you scrub. The ditch used to be deeper, they say, dug by monks who believed in channels and penance, a way to ferry off the sins of the flesh through engineering. But over time, like everything, it filled, first with silt, then with moss, then with waste, slowly, then suddenly. Now it winds its way like a memory, skirting behind taverns and granaries, disappearing under market stalls and emerging again behind the weaver's shop, still bubbling, still alive. The children throw stones into it. They laugh when it splashes. They don't yet understand what they're touching. You did once, too. You remember the first time your toe slipped from the plank bridge and dipped into the flow? You limped for a week, swollen and red. You never told your parents. You just washed it in rainwater and waited for it to stop pulsing. You've thought often about leaving. Everyone has. You hear the stories of cleaner towns upriver, of stonework that holds, of sewers that actually carry waste away, rather than coax it deeper into the soil. You know someone who tried. She packed one morning, just before dawn, and walked west with her child tied to her back. She returned a month later, said nothing, but her boots were ruined, and her eyes looked heavier. Maybe it was no better there. Maybe she couldn't outrun the smell. Maybe some things follow you, because this ditch isn't just a drainage path, it's a ledger. It holds the history of everything you've eaten, everything you've lost, everything you've chosen not to see. When a fire took the butcher's shop, it ran with ash and blood for a week. When the river flooded, it filled with fish and human teeth. When the plague came, it carried linen and bile, and no one dared go near. But even in peace, even on bright, clean mornings, when the sky shines with a cruelty that feels almost like forgiveness, the ditch remains. It's the town's only honest mirror. You know its sounds now. You know when it's backing up, when it's free-flowing, when something's blocking the culvert behind the granary. You've cleared it with a stick more than once. You've pulled free clumps of rags, chewed bone, something once shaped like a doll. You threw them into the fire and didn't ask questions. That's the rule. Here, don't ask questions about what you pull from the ditch. If it doesn't scream, it wasn't alive. Probably. There's an old man who sits further down, near where the ditch empties into the marsh. He talks to it sometimes. He says it listens. He once told you that everything flushed away still has weight. Waste doesn't vanish, he said. It just moves slower than regret. You laughed, then you didn't, because you knew what he meant. You've seen the way the ditch remembers how every attempt to fix it fails, how new stonework buckles and gives, how the stink returns no matter what you pour in to stop it. Vinegar, wine, oil, prayer, it drinks them all, and the town endures. Because what else can it do? It builds over the rot. It paints the walls and lights the candles and hopes the ditch stays quiet. You've seen festivals held within yards of it, music drowning out the gurgle, dancers hopping over planks and laughing as if joy could outpace decay. But always, the ditch remains, a low, wet laugh beneath the noise, a whisper that the town will never quite cleanse. You once saw a bride step too close and slip. She returned in tears, veil soaked, shame etched into her gown. The music paused, then resumed. The town forgets quickly. The ditch does not Some call it a curse, others, a design flaw. You think it's a reminder that for all the prayers and processions and proclamations, for all the cloaks and coins and candles, waste is still what binds us. That, in the end, no matter how high you live, your bucket still fills, and someone else must carry it. That behind every banner is a broom, and beneath every throne is a pit. You've walked past lords in silks who flinch at the same smell as the beggar. You've seen councilmen pinch their noses while a child wades through ankle-deep filth to fetch a dropped toy. You've heard the priest cough during vespers, pausing as a gust of sewer air drifts in through the cracks. You've begun to think of the ditch not as something to fix, but something to understand, to accept. It's not a failure of design, it's the design. A town is not made of stone and roof and rule. It's made of what it hides and what it fails to. This ditch, this slow brown ribbon winding through the cracks, is the truest part of the town, the part no one celebrates, the part everyone touches, the part no one escapes. You sit a while longer, letting the wind press its scent into your clothes. You no longer flinch, you no longer gag, you just breathe it in sickly, sour, familiar. It's the smell of survival, the smell of refusal, the smell of living too close for too long to what everyone wishes wasn't real. And you realize something simple, something terrifying, something that feels almost like peace. You don't hate the ditch, you've come to need it. Because if the ditch ever ran dry, if the stink ever stopped, then what would be left? Just silence. Just stillness. Just a town that has nothing more to expel, and that, more than anything, would mean it's dead. So you rise, wipe your hands on your trousers, and walk home. The same path, the same cracks, the same soft stones you've memorized by weight. You'll boil water tonight. You'll check the chamber pot. You'll light a candle and watch the smoke spiral against the ceiling, trying not to wonder where it will go. And in the distance, barely audible over the wind, the ditch will gurgle, still moving, still carrying, still reminding. And now, as the fire burns low and the town quiets, the ditch hums a little softer, the rats curl into sleep, the sewers settle, the night carries the same scent it always has, but somehow, it's less sharp now, less an assault and more an echo. The streets, damp and crooked, breathe with the weight of centuries, and you, stretched beneath your blanket or head resting on your pillow, let it all sink deeper into the background. You think of boots drying beside the fire, of old planks laid over soft ground, of candles lit not to chase the dark away, but to make peace with it. You picture moss reclaiming the cracks, vines climbing up the walls, the slow, forgiving erasure of time. Nothing ever stays clean for long, but nothing stays lost forever, either. The ditch will still run tomorrow. The town will still creak, but for now, there is stillness. For now, your breath slows. The weight of the day eases from your shoulders. You've walked the muck, seen what hides beneath, and come through. Maybe stained, maybe tired, but whole. So let the wind rustle the shutters. Let the floor creak beneath the old beams. Let the waste do what it must. You've earned this sleep. You've earned this hush. Close your eyes. Let it go. The stink can't follow you here. Not tonight.